The Clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Tobacco and Vapes Bill, second reading.
No? Vicky? No. Minister to move second reading.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the bill now be read a second time. Today, across the UK, 350 young people aged 25 and under will take up smoking. It's a decision that the vast majority will later regret. They will try to quit again and again, but most won't be able to break their addiction. They will suffer strokes, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, stillbirth, dementia or asthma as a direct result of smoking. And for 2 in 3 of those young people, the habit they are beginning today will eventually kill them. Smoking takes 80,000 lives a year, causes 1 in 4 deaths from cancer in England, a hospital admission almost every minute, 100 GP appointments an hour. It is the leading cause of sickness, disability and death in our country. And today, members in this House can consign it to the history books. Yeah. The bill before the House today will raise the legal age of sale of tobacco by 1 year every year, creating the first smoke-free generation and eventually a smoke-free nation. I'll just make some progress on opening the arguments and I'll take interventions. The bill will enable the government to extend the current indoor smoking ban to certain outdoor settings, and we will consult on banning smoking outside schools, hospitals and in playgrounds, protecting children and vulnerable people from the harms of second-hand smoke. Right. And this bill will come down on the vaping industry like a ton of bricks to prevent a new generation of children and young people from getting hooked on nicotine. Taken together, these measures add up to the most significant public health intervention in a generation, a giant leap in this government's mission to build a healthy society, and in doing so, helping to build a more healthy economy too. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Imagine the plight of a shop assistant some decades hence when a middle-aged person, indeed an elderly person, presents himself or herself seeking to buy a packet of cigarettes. Is that shop assistant really expected to demand their bona fides?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I can not only imagine it, I recently experienced a similar situation. In Barkingside Sainsbury's, there I was one evening buying a bottle of wine for dinner, and to my surprise, only weeks ago, I was asked for my ID. I'm afraid it's just a burden that those of us with youthful vim and vigour in our early 40s have to bear. And it is a price I'm willing to pay for good moisturiser. But there's a serious point here, which is, and this is, and I'm sure we'll encounter many of these during the passage of the bill, this is one of the cynical arguments being deployed by the mendacious smoking lobby, who would have us believe that decades hence there will be people who are at the margins of, one person next to the other, 141, 140, being asked for ID on the sale of cigarettes. The point is, this bill will create a smoke-free generation. Young people growing up in our country today will not be smokers because we will have stopped the start. And for adults who are currently smoking, we will do everything we can to support them because the vast majority want to break the habit but struggle to do so. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Very grateful to the Secretary of State, and if only proof of age was still asked of me, but there we go. He will know, I support this bill and I shall vote for it this evening, so he can rest assured on that. But he will know that rural pubs are increasingly marginal in their operations. He's referenced further powers, post-consultation, that may stop smoking outside permitted places once the bill is on the statute book. Can I invite him to put rural MPs across the House minds at rest that he's not envisaging at any point in consultation, either now or post-royal assent, to include a ban on smoking outside rural pubs, because it would be a further nail in their business model at a time when we need them.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his intervention. I was going to address this later in my speech, but let me address it now, because it's not often government comments on leaks, or indeed welcomes the events following a leak, and I don't want to encourage future leaks for that matter either. But look, the fact is, it is well known and a matter of accurate reporting in this case, that we were considering extension of the ban on outdoor smoking to outdoor hospitality, including pubs, as he mentions. And because of that leak, representations were heard from members right across the House, actually, from the honourable gentleman, my honourable friend, the member for Great Grimsby and others, and we took those representations very seriously, because we know the hospitality industry has been through an absolutely torrid time. It's not just in rural communities, though I accept that particularly for rural pubs it's a big challenge. I think even for towns and cities, the high street is struggling. And our approach to public health has always got to weigh up the upside benefits to public health against the downside consequences elsewhere, and it's not in the national interest for us to see our high streets further suffer. So I can reassure the honourable member and the hospitality industry, or I think they feel reassured on this already, that we will not be consulting on extending these powers to outdoor hospitality spaces. And I hope that reassures people as we embark on consultation on the measures that I am outlining today, that this government does listen, we do engage, and we do consult seriously. Consultation is genuine with this government. And I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank Secretary of State for giving way on that point. I won't comment on how young I look, but I think I still get ID'd for non-alcoholic wine. I just wanted to raise the point that it's 10 years since the smoking ban came into operation, and there are 1.9 million less smokers in the UK. Does this show the Secretary of State the difference that the government can make that takes this issue seriously?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. I'm really proud of the impact that the last Labour government made in reducing smoking harms and the prevalence of smoking in our country. And that brings me on to the next point I wanted to make. President Truman famously said, "It is amazing what you can achieve if you do not care who gets the credit." Madam Deputy Speaker, when I first sat down with Rachel Sylvester of The Times in January 2023 and flew a kite to start a debate that a Labour government might introduce a ban on children and young people today ever buying cigarettes of the type introduced by our sister party in New Zealand, I wasn't necessarily convinced my own side would buy it, but I thought it was a debate worth having. I never imagined in a million years that I would tune into a Conservative Party conference speech by a Conservative Prime Minister announcing his intention to legislate for such a ban. So I'm going to do something I don't often do with Conservative Party conference speeches and quote extensively and approvingly of what the then Prime Minister said. He said, and I quote, "As Prime Minister, I have an obligation to do what I think is the right thing for our country in the long term. And as Conservatives, we've never shirked that responsibility." Okay, I've said that bit through gritted teeth. "We've always been at the front of society, leading it." Who wrote this? "And when we have the tools at our disposal to do for our children what we all in our heart of hearts know is right, we must act, we must lead, we must put the next generation first. And in that spirit, I want to pay tribute to the former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Richmond and Northallerton, for picking up the proposal and running with it despite opposition from his own party. That took courage. And while we have taken steps to improve this bill from the one put forward by the previous government, I hope that honourable and right honourable members opposite will follow his lead, showing that the One Nation tradition still has a constituency in the modern Conservative Party, and vote for this bill in the national interest. Because the Darcy investigation into the NHS set out the twin challenges facing myself, my department and this government. The National Health Service is broken. It is going through the worst crisis in its history. At the point we came into office, waiting lists stood at 7.6 million. We had worse cancer survival rates than most comparable countries, ambulances not arriving on time, the number of GPs falling, and dentistry deserts across the country. But some of the most shocking findings in Lord Darcy's report weren't about the sickness in our NHS, but the sickness in our nation. Children are less healthy today than a decade ago. Life expectancy was extended by 3.5 years over the course of the last Labour government, but in the past 14 years it has grown by just 4 months. Brits now live shorter lives than people in any other country in Western Europe, and we spend fewer years living in good health, becoming sicker sooner. These are huge costs borne by all of us as individuals. It means less time in which we are able to live our lives to the full, to do all of the things that we love, and spend time with the people we love. Sickness is forcing many of us out of work long before retirement age, leaving us dependent on welfare, ridding us of the purpose and belonging that work provides. And for everyone else, it means higher costs to us as taxpayers. Our sick society is holding back our economy, and that is why we should act. I'll give way to the Chair of the Select Committee and I'll continue.
For giving way, and in the spirit of cross-party working, I also want to congratulate the Conservative benches for when the former Prime Minister put this forward, deciding that this was a priority. I think it shows how important it is that Number 10 gets behind this kind of thing, and I hope that that's the lesson we learn for the missions. I would just gently say, however, it is not just the evil tobacco lobby that have concerns about the age escalator. And everything that he says, I completely agree with. But I do have a concern that if it is that much of an issue, why are we not just banning it under an age of, say, 25? And that would have been another way to go. What is the thinking behind an age escalator as opposed to a ban under an age where people don't need new ID every time in order to do this?
I'm grateful for the question. Look, I recognise that there are people who have the freedom, the liberty to be able to smoke today, many of whom, and the vast majority of whom, by the way, want to stop and struggle to do so. And that's why we're announcing support to enable people to do that with £70 million of investment in smoking cessation services. That's important. But I think in terms of a future precedent where people are no longer able to smoke, I think a phased approach, phasing it in, is the right thing to do. And it is also, I think, essential for the health of the individual, the health of the nation and the health of our economy, because since 2018 our productivity has dropped by £25 billion due to worsening health alone. 900,000 people, more people, are off work than would have been on pre-pandemic trends. That's more people than Tesco, Sainsbury's and Asda employed put together. Smoking alone accounts for over £18 billion in lost productivity. This rising tide of ill health, coupled with our ageing society, presents an existential challenge to our health service. If we don't act now, ever-increasing demands for healthcare threaten to overwhelm and bankrupt the NHS. That's the choice that we face. I'll give way to the member for Romford.
But surely he realises that banning things very rarely works. So when they banned tobacco in South Africa during the COVID pandemic, 95% of the trade went underground. Surely we should be promoting the concept of freedom with responsibility and allowing people to make choices about their own lives. I'm glad he goes shopping in Barkingside. Go and speak to the shopkeepers in Collier Row who are going to lose. The local retailers will actually lose a lot of potential business if this ban comes in.
I'm grateful for the intervention because I anticipate that there will be similar arguments opposite, particularly from a right-wing libertarian perspective, and I want to engage seriously with those arguments. I'll just respond to the honourable member's point. There is no liberty in addiction. There is no freedom in addiction. Yeah. And the logical extension of the libertarian argument he puts forward would be the end of the ban on indoor smoking. We should take a live and let live approach on that ideological prediction. Why not legalise cannabis? Why not legalise cocaine? We do prescribe certain harmful substances, and there is, I think, an unanswerable case on tobacco because it is uniquely addictive, uniquely harmful, and that is why we would take a tougher approach with this harmful substance than we would something like alcohol or other harms such as gambling. And I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. He stole my line, actually, that there is no freedom in addiction. I just want to also thank his pragmatic approach to the hospitality industry, because I've received some representations on that. But could I just impress upon him that vapes are a valuable quitting aid for many adults, but many young people now are taking to vaping when they've never actually smoked at all. And would you like to say a little bit more about how we'll address that?
I will certainly come on to the action we're taking on vaping and the case for it. And I really welcome the contribution my honourable friend has made to this House in his first few months as a member. He brings enormous expertise and experience, particularly on health, which we very much value here in the Chamber. The choice that we have is we can continue paying a heavier and heavier price of failure, and that is the road we were heading down under the previous government. Our NHS is already taking £4 for every 10 spent by government day to day. We're on course to go from a nation with a national health service to a health service with a nation attached to it. By the end of this Parliament, 4.3 million people are projected to be on sickness benefits if we fail to act. Smoking could cause 300,000 patients to be diagnosed with cancer over the next 5 years, including 3,000 caused by exposure to second-hand smoke. This is what happens if you only ever treat the symptoms of ill health. You end up spending more on the NHS than ever before, but with worse care for patients. A ballooning welfare bill with more and more people out of work, stagnant economic growth, and the heaviest tax burden in 70 years. In short, paying more but getting less. Britain is like a ship with a hull. We are constantly battling to chuck out enough water overboard to keep us afloat as more and more floods in. We have got to break out of this cycle. Britain can break out of this cycle, but only if we are serious about tackling the causes of ill health, shifting our focus from treating the symptoms to preventing them in the first place. Plugging the hole in the ship. That is how we get back to growth, that is how we reduce the burden of taxation, and that is how government can intrude more lightly on people's lives. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
To the Secretary of State for giving way. The argument he's putting forward is essentially an argument for banning smoking altogether. And what he's been saying earlier, it was misleading in that it was suggesting that people in a particular age group won't be able to smoke. What they won't be able to do is they won't be able to buy cigarettes, but they will still be able to smoke and cad cigarettes off other people. Isn't this a half-baked measure?
I'm sure the honourable gentleman wasn't accusing me of misleading the House. I would just say to him, look, the argument he puts forward is actually an argument against all sorts of laws and prohibitions. Most people in this country are law-abiding citizens. Yeah. They follow the law. It is the case in my constituency today that people will be dumping fridges and mattresses on street corners and fly tipping because they are irresponsible and they are not law-abiding citizens. It is also the case that we will not always catch them either through CCTV or local authority enforcement. That doesn't mean we should ban the practice, and it doesn't mean we should tackle people when they do it. And I think we are taking a measured and reasonable way to creating a smoke-free country by phasing in the generational smoking ban. I think that is a sensible way to proceed. I think it is the right way to proceed. And if he doesn't agree, and I know he doesn't, I think he's got to accept the choices and trade-offs he's making through his opposition. Because he is firstly accepting that people will pay a higher price for their healthcare, either through taxes, if he still believes in the National Health Service, or through the cost to the individual of their costs of healthcare. And the second thing he has to concede, if this is his approach, is that through the harms caused by smoking, he is fuelling welfare dependency. And I think this is one of the reasons why my right honourable friend, the Work and Pensions Secretary, had a point earlier when she said the Labour Party is the party of work and the Conservative Party is the party of welfare. That is the logical conclusion of his opposition. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you for giving way, and I'd just like to congratulate my honourable friend for bringing forward this once-in-a-generation public health measure. As he himself rightly acknowledged, too many people are dying young from the causes of smoking and losing out on being grandparents and having those opportunities to live a long and healthy life. We know that smoking is one of the leading causes of health inequalities still. So does he agree with me that these proposals will help close the shocking gap in life expectancy and healthy life expectancy between the rich and poor?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I'm afraid it was one of my first experiences of death, watching my grandmother die a very long, slow, painful death as a result of lung cancer and as a result of a lifetime spent chain smoking, and that is the consequence of this cruel addiction. People who start later regret it. They struggle to stop, and I'm afraid it is the stolen years of children and grandchildren that is only part of the cost. And of course, part of my argument today, particularly for some members opposite, is an argument that's about better use of public money, how to reduce the burden of taxation, and other arguments that I think have some currency with members who might be opposed for libertarian reasons. But in this, we should also not forget for a moment the impact on people's quality of life, family life, and memories of this cruel addiction and the harms caused by smoking. I must make some progress, otherwise we'll never hear from anyone else in this debate, and I think it's going to be a debate. Of course, taking action requires a reforming government, unafraid to take on the orthodoxies of both the right and the left. As I said, my right honourable friend, the Work and Pensions Secretary, is today proposing radical reforms to the welfare system. Early this month, I set out a package of reforms to drive better productivity in the NHS. And today we are proposing the biggest public health reform in a generation, phasing out the smoking for the next generation by raising the legal age at which tobacco can be sold by 1 year every year, so that anyone aged 15 and under today will never legally be sold cigarettes, phasing out smoking altogether. And Madam Deputy Speaker, almost 20 years ago, the last Labour government introduced the ban on smoking indoors in public places, as my honourable friend said. We heard many of the same arguments, frankly, from opponents of that measure as we hear from opponents of this bill today. And they're free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think members opposite who oppose this bill are also proposing scrapping the indoor smoking ban. We have a political consensus on this issue because of its success. The year after it came into force in 2007, hospital admissions for heart attacks dropped by 1,200. Admissions for children with asthma had been rising by 5% a year before the ban. After it was introduced, admissions fell by 18% in just 3 years. Since 2007, smoking rates have been cut by over a third. And as our understanding of second-hand smoke grew, it sparked a cultural change. People no longer thought it acceptable to smoke in front of their children. Many stepped outside, even in their own homes. And so it is time to build on that success. No smoker intends on causing harm to others, but that is unintentionally what they do through second-hand smoke. The harms are less than actively smoking, but the evidence shows they are still substantial. If you can smell smoke, you are inhaling it. Smoke near schools and playgrounds exposes children to smoke. Hospitals, by definition, have very high numbers of medically vulnerable people on their grounds. So this bill will allow government to extend the ban on indoor smoking to certain outdoor settings, and we will consult on banning smoking outside schools, playgrounds and hospitals to protect children and the most vulnerable. And as we act to prevent harms from smoking, we must also tackle the rising problem of youth vaping. It has more than doubled in the last 5 years, and 1 in 4 11 to 15-year-olds tried vaping last year. A new generation of children are getting hooked on nicotine, and there should be no doubt about the cause and no illusions that this has happened by accident. Go to any high street in the country and you will see shop windows filled with brightly coloured packaging for vapes with flavours like Blue Raz Lemonade and Tongue Twisters Sour Apple. These products are designed, made, packaged, marketed and sold deliberately to children. This is an industry that has cynically targeted its harmful products to kids. Action is long overdue. We promised to stamp this out in our manifesto, and this bill delivers the change we promised. It will close loopholes that allow vapes to be sold or given away to children, provide powers to regulate the flavours, packaging and display of vapes, introduce on-the-spot fines of £200 for underage sales. And just as we took action on the advertising and sponsorship of tobacco products, we will bring the law into line for vaping products too. I'll certainly give way.
I thank him for giving way. I don't know whether he will be still in the chamber when I'm talking about spice-spiked vapes and the gap that I that I see in this bill of not talking about refills, because the harmful practice of spice-spiked vapes comes with the refills. I hope the government will be flexible, as it has already shown in other places, and listen to my concerns, and possibly through the passage of the bill, see whether we can also include something about refills. Would he possibly agree to that?
We want to work in a genuinely collaborative and cross-party way, and as I look at the benches opposite, including Conservative benches, I see long-standing campaigners for action on smoking and action on vaping, and I know that's true right across the House. We want to listen, we want to engage. I feel very strongly about this, as does the Prime Minister. We set out in our manifesto Labour's mission to improve the health of the nation. We will be far better served as a country if this is a truly national mission and if we come together in common cause for action on public health. And in that spirit, I'll give way to honourable gentlemen, then take some of my friends too.
Very grateful to Secretary of State for giving way on this. Can he tell us if there is any place for vapes in the context of the addictive aspects of tobacco as a step down? I seem to remember that when vaping first came along, it was being heralded as a way to help wean people off their tobacco addiction. Sadly, it has turned into something else, as he describes, to start children on the road towards nicotine addiction. But as a step down, does it have a role?
The right honourable member is right to make that distinction. As a stop smoking tool, vaping has a part to play. And if you are smoking, vaping is a better alternative as a route away from smoking. And we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And what we are interested in tackling is the scourge of youth vaping and the extent to which young people have been cynically addicted. And I think it's important to say we do not yet know the full extent of the harms caused by vaping, but we do know two things. Firstly, it's better to vape than it is to smoke. That's why we're striking the balance in this legislation. Second, we know that vapes are harmful. Ask any teacher in the country. They will tell you about the signs of nicotine addiction they see in their pupils and how they have to monitor school toilets to stop children congregating to vape. So it is urgent and necessary to act today to prevent this generation of kids from a new addiction, and that is exactly what we will do. Give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. As an ENT surgeon, I can attest to the absolutely desperate trouble that cigarettes have caused over many generations. And I think this measure is one of the best things this Parliament could possibly do. And I expect that it will be widely supported all over the House. And I'm grateful to my Honourable Minister for doing this.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that intervention, not least because of the expertise he brings to this House as a clinician, and we are well served by his expertise in debates on the health of the nation. Look, Madam Deputy Speaker, opposite me stand many opponents of this bill and of the prevention agenda this government is taking. I acknowledge they oppose this out of genuine and sincere beliefs in the limits of government and the size of the state. But I want to appeal to them that this bill is in the national interest and, ironically, is in their ideological interests. I'll give way to the honourable member.
And I thank the Secretary of State for his point, because he has used the phrase a number of times about this being a truly national bill across the United Kingdom, and I want to thank him at this stage for including Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales in these measures, because I think when we look at these health promotions that we can actually bring about in this place, that we should be doing it equally across the entirety of our United Kingdom.
That is a very, very helpful intervention, because it gives me the opportunity to say thank you to my counterparts in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. This is a genuinely four nations bill, and we through this bill, I think, have an opportunity to create a smoke-free generation in every corner of our country. And on that, I would just say to people who have an ideological objection to this bill, if they believe in lower taxes, as they say they do, if they believe in maintaining a national health service, as they say they do, then they cannot duck the simple equation that an ageing population plus a sicker society equals more spending on the NHS paid through higher taxes. This bill before the House is just one measure, but it will make a significant difference to the health of our society and the balance of that equation. And the question opponents of this bill have to answer is this: If they want our health and care services to continue having to spend £3 billion every year on the symptoms of smoking, are they willing to accept that means higher taxes or higher healthcare charges for their constituents? Are they happy for their constituents to shoulder the welfare bill for smokers falling out of the workforce? Because those are the consequences of what we are voting for today. Higher taxes and higher welfare are not the Labour way. And on the argument on liberty, and those who oppose out of libertarian belief, they say the state shouldn't deny individuals the choice to smoke if they want to. But 3/4 of smokers want to stop and wish they had never started. It takes a smoker an average of 30 attempts to quit before some manage it. By definition, an addict is not free. There is no choice, no liberty, no freedom in addiction, nor is there a choice awarded to anyone inhaling second-hand smoke. And tobacco is not only highly addictive, but a uniquely harmful substance. Yes, some smokers can quit, but most who want to can't. Those who have helped to do so are 3 times more likely to succeed. That's why, as I said, this government is investing £70 million in smoking cessation services, an investment that will pay for itself several times over. But prevention is better than cure, and that is why we are taking action in this bill to stop the start. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill marks the start of a decade in which we will shift the focus of healthcare from treatment to prevention, in which we take serious action, not just on smoking, but on obesity too, where we reform the NHS so the health service catches problems earlier and gives patients the tools they need to stay out of hospital, and where we harness the revolution taking place in life sciences and fundamentally transform the NHS so it predicts and prevents illness from ever taking hold. That is the future available to us, and it is the future we must realise if we're going to put our welfare system, health service and public finances on a sustainable footing. It starts with this bill. Smokers are more likely to need NHS services, be admitted to hospital, drop out of the workforce and onto welfare, and need social care years earlier than if they didn't smoke. By taking the measures set out here, we are putting the UK on the road to becoming smoke-free, building a healthier, wealthier nation with a health service fit for the future and leading the world as we do so. I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Shadow Secretary of State, Ed Argar.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I at the start, and I don't always do this, express my gratitude to the Secretary of State for the tone he has adopted in this debate, recognising that there are strongly and sincerely held views on both sides of this debate by honourable and right honourable members, and also for his being typically willing to share with this House in support of his points something as personal as what happened to his grandmother. So I'm grateful to him for that. I would also say to him, sadly, it won't surprise the right honourable gentleman, that sadly no one asks me for my ID these days. I'll have to take some tips from him on the moisturiser he uses, and I'll ignore the unkind comment the right honourable gentleman has just made. This bill is, Madam Deputy Speaker, in many ways like the curate's egg, good in parts, indeed good in many parts, and it started from a place of good intentions. But smoking has, as the Secretary of State set out, a huge cost to society and to individuals. We know that smoking is the single biggest entirely preventable cause of ill health, death and disability in this country, and we see in our NHS the impact of smoking every day. It is responsible for around 80,000 deaths in the UK each year. It's estimated to cost the NHS and social care more than £3 billion a year, including 75,000 GP appointments every month. On almost every minute, someone is admitted to hospital, as the Secretary of State said, because of smoking. It also substantially increases the risk of many major health conditions throughout people's lives, such as strokes, diabetes, heart disease, stillbirth, cancers, dementia and asthma. And it is, as the Secretary of State set out, those, or as alluded to in the past, I should say, often those in more deprived areas that have higher smoking rates, lower healthy life expectancy, and indeed higher mortality rates linked to smoking. 230,000 households are estimated to live in smoking-induced poverty. And of course, children of smokers are 3 times as likely to start to smoke, potentially perpetuating that cycle. Over 80% of smokers started before they turned 20, many as children, and yet over half of current smokers want to quit, and as he said, 3/4 say they would never have started smoking if they had the choice again. So let me be clear, reducing smoking, giving people the information and support to quit, and helping particularly to protect children are worthy ambitions. And amongst all the doom and gloom, there is some positive news that smoking rates are falling anyway. While around 6 million people in the UK smoke, the number of smokers has been falling for decades. In 2023, just 10.5% of people aged 16 and over smoked, compared to 20.3% in 2010, 20.7% in 2000 and 30% the decade before that in 1990. And likewise, the number of children smoking is falling. But while this trend is welcome, it is understandable why there is a strong desire to see continued action to further drive down the prevalence of smoking and to tackle the recent rise in vaping amongst non-smokers, especially amongst young people, and to protect future generations. Now, I'm sure that many of us in this House, as has been evidenced by the interventions the Secretary of State kindly took from many honourable members, have been alarmed by the surge in youth vaping, which has doubled in the past 5 years. Despite it already being illegal to sell nicotine vapes to under 18s, a quarter of children tried vaping in 2023. And while nicotine vapes can and do play an important part in helping adults to quit smoking, we're clear that children who do not smoke should not take up vaping. The nicotine content makes these products highly addictive, while the long-term impact that colours and flavours being inhaled are highly unlikely to be beneficial, but of course the full effect may not be known for some years yet. Now, this uptake in youth vaping has been driven in part by the branding and promotion of products clearly aimed at children, with vapes, packaging, descriptions and marketing all designed to appeal specifically to young people. Grown adults trying to quit smoking are unlikely to see the appeal of cartoon characters on their vapes, but of course children and young people will. Likewise, the bright colours and fruit flavours are far more likely to appeal to children than those looking to quit tobacco smoking. That's why the last government introduced a bill which primarily targeted our interventions at young people. It would restrict who could purchase tobacco products without impacting current adult smokers. It sought to tackle youth vaping by restricting flavours, introducing plain packaging and changing how vapes are displayed in shops so they do not appeal to children. And it would have prohibited non-nicotine vapes and vaping alternatives such as nicotine pouches for under 18s, just as it is already illegal to sell nicotine vapes to children. And it would in parallel have introduced new fines for rogue retailers to tackle the illegal market, seeking to make sure that the law, such as age restrictions on purchasing vapes, was properly enforced. This was an approach which was targeted at the next generation of young people, aimed at preventing the take-up of smoking and vaping and breaking that cycle of nicotine addiction before it was even started. It was a bill that was not about demonising people who smoke or curtailing current smokers' rights or entitlements in any way. But it was nonetheless a bill with challenging practical implementation impacts, which I hope the Public Health Minister, who I know well, the Honourable Member for Galton and Denton, which I think is his new constituency name, I have a lot of respect for him, and I hope he'll be able in his wind-up to address some of the points I am about to make. The impact on shopkeepers, particularly small shopkeepers, which I'll turn to, of enforcing and operating within increased restriction. The extent to which they are in reality practically enforceable. How one avoids, in the context of what this bill is setting out to do, the existence or the increase in a black market economy in either vapes or cigarettes. Now, since we set out our bill before the general election, the new government has come back with a bill that may have the same name, Madam Deputy Speaker, but is not quite the same bill that was introduced back in March. The bill that we have in front of us today takes new or significantly modified powers under the Health Act 2006 for the Secretary of State. It does run the risk of piling an unknown number of regulations onto retailers with a new licensing scheme and creates a whole new registration scheme. The challenge is that, of course, honourable and right honourable members won't be told until after the passage of this legislation what those schemes actually look like in detail, or the specific impact it will have on businesses, or the detailed impact it will have on smoking and vaping rates. Now, I note there's a hefty impact assessment, all 294 pages of it, which, given he's signed it, I fear the Public Health Minister will have had to read every one of them before doing so. But even with that, it is unclear of the detailed impact of individual regulations that may follow. Take, for example, the new powers reflecting the Health Act 2006 in the bill to extend smoke-free places to some outdoor spaces. Clause 136. Now, of course, adults should rightly be mindful and thoughtful about where they are smoking and vaping, to be considerate to those around, and especially in areas with children or vulnerable young people. But this bill risks giving the Secretary of State expanded powers to expand smoke-free areas with minimal oversight. I acknowledge that it's an affirmative resolution procedure, but as we know in this House, a statutory instrument and the procedures which accompany it are not as rigorous in their scrutiny as that of primary legislation. And unlike previous laws which ban smoking in confined areas such as pubs and bars, the Secretary of State is talking about bans in open spaces where the risk of second-hand smoking may be more limited. Now, the Delegated Powers Memorandum sets out on page 64, say under Section 4 of the 2006 Act, the Secretary of State could make regulations to designate additional places as smoke-free, provided they were of the opinion that there was a significant risk persons present in such a place would be exposed to significant quantities of smoke without a smoke-free designation. Section 5 of the 2006 Act gave the Secretary of State powers to make regulations for vehicles to be smoke-free. It goes on to say, Clause 136 amends the existing power in Section 4 of the 2006 Act by omitting the risk condition. Now, I would be grateful if, in his winding up, and I suspect he'll be able to do so, the Public Health Minister will explain why that condition, which was there for a reason to give a sense of proportionality to anything that was done and a particular bar that had to be met, given the impacts, why that condition is being removed, effectively giving the Secretary of State much greater discretion to do as he wishes at a future date. Now, I note the Secretary of State has said today that he changed his mind on banning smoking in pub gardens or outside hospitality venues. Now, I know the Secretary of State well. He is an honourable man, and I take him at his word on that. But there is nothing in this legislation that would prevent a future Secretary of State coming back, consulting and expanding beyond the areas he is proposing to take powers to restrict smoking in, and expanding it to other venues, other settings at a future date, without that crucial risk criteria being applied under the changes under Clause 136. So I'd be grateful if the Minister will be able to address that point, because I think that is hugely important. I'll just finish this point, and then, of course, I'll give way to the honourable gentleman. As members are being asked to decide now whether they support expanding smoke-free places to an unknown list of outdoor spaces in the future, this does genuinely raise significant challenges and concerns without that gateway being in place. Of course, I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. I'm listening very, very carefully to what he has to say. 13% of adults in Bracknell smoke, but we know that over half of smokers would like to give up. So I guess what I'm listening for, what my constituents will be listening for, is a commitment that his party will be backing some concrete measures to end the public health epidemic of smoking once and for all. Or are they just going to wrap up their objections in sophistry?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for most of what he addressed to me there. I will come on to address exactly his point in a few paragraphs of my remaining remarks. But what I would say to him in response to that, it was this party that brought forward a piece of legislation in March or April, debated in April of this year, but which did not have that essentially mission creep, which I fear under Clause 136 and various other measures the Secretary of State is demonstrating with this legislation. But I will, if he gives me a few more minutes, address specifically the point he is getting at with his remarks. I will make some progress and I'll address his honourable friend's point. I must also challenge how the government anticipates this being enforced. Will members of the public be encouraged to call the police if they see a parent smoking in a prohibited place? And I'm understanding the legislation, what about if there are no children in a park or in a playground? Would it still be prohibited then? Concerns are also raised by the new licensing and registration schemes While it is right that we had planned to expand the existing notification scheme to include non-nicotine vapes and nicotine products involved in the supply chain, this new bill goes a number of steps further. Under this legislation, the Secretary of State can create a new licensing regime for retailers of tobacco, vaping and nicotine products. Now, over 70% of convenience stores selling vapes and tobacco products are independent shops. How will they fare and how will they be assisted with the layers of added bureaucracy and cost that will be associated with this? And do local authorities already under pressure have the capacity and additional funding allocated to administer such a licensing scheme in their areas? But again, my fear is we are unable to make a fully informed decision about the impact of this because the actual regulations will only be set out after this bill has passed. The impact assessment, I want to make a little progress, so I do want to try and come to her honourable friend's point before I conclude. The impact assessment says that a more restricted licensing scheme would be expected to have a greater impact on public health and a greater economic impact on businesses, but we simply don't know if that is what the Secretary of State has in mind, what those regulations will actually look like. Likewise, the details of a new registration scheme for all tobacco, vaping, nicotine and herbal products, as well as tobacco-related devices. All these impacts are unknown in their detail. Madam Deputy Speaker, in the few months they've been in office, sadly the party opposite have shown they are not particularly a friend of business and have broken a number of their pre-election promises. So while I have confidence in the Secretary of State as an individual and as a right honourable member of this House, I have to say, please forgive the cynicism on these benches over any attempted reassurances from the government that they will take into account concerns from businesses as they consult on their plans. Now, to the honourable gentleman's point, for members on this side of the House in this party, in line with the precedent set last time, this will be a free vote for each member to vote as they choose this evening when if a division is called. The legislation, as I've said, comes from a place of good intention to keep the public healthy, ease costs the NHS and prevent children from taking up addictive habits that may follow them for the rest of their lives, and I support those objectives. But I do call on the Minister for Public Health when he winds up to hopefully give the reassurances I seek about rolling back from the additional measures that have been put in place over and above what we were proposing. It is important that information is available for people to make informed decisions and support is available for those who choose to stop smoking. Adult individuals are best placed to make decisions about their own lives, but we do recognise the same is not true in the nature of it for children. I look forward to the Minister for Public Health's responses, which I hope will be constructive, and I welcome the Secretary of State's offer to be collaborative and constructive in his approach to this legislation. Very briefly, because I've got about one sentence to go.
The right honourable member for giving way. As a public health doctor, I am delighted to hear him speak so freely and openly and positively about all the great things this bill will bring. But I remain unclear whether the right honourable member will actually be voting in support of this generation-defining public health bill this evening.
Very grateful, and that will be dependent on whether this minister gives the promises I seek that he will withdraw a number of measures that they have added into the bill. And to the Secretary of State's point, I very much look forward, and I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Sleaford and North Hykeham, who will be taking this bill through committee on behalf of our front bench. And I know that she will look forward to, I hope, constructive and collaborative engagement with the Minister for Public Health. And I hope that he is able to offer reassurances when he gets up to the dispatch box in a few hours' time.
Mary Kelly-Foy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I declare an interest as co-chair of the APPG on smoking and health. Just over a year ago, I welcomed the previous government's Tobacco and Vapes bill. And as you may know, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've called for a smoke-free generation for many years. And I wasn't best pleased when the party opposite voted down my amendments in 2021 to the Health and Care Bill, amendments that called for a ban of the flavours and packaging targeted towards children that the Shadow Secretary of State has just brought to our attention. If they hadn't voted them down, we'd already have regulations to protect children from smoking and vaping. And I agree with the Secretary of State in congratulating the former Prime Minister in bringing the bill forward, but it was regrettable that the previous government didn't fast-track the bill in the wash-up before the general election. Nevertheless, I'm grateful to the Labour government for bringing this bill forward, one which is stronger than the previous legislation and responds to many of the issues I and others raised during the previous bill's committee stage. The comprehensive regulations of all vaping and nicotine products are important for addressing the concerns that vaping has become too widespread among young people, and I strongly support regulations to reduce the appeal of these products. But we must, of course, ensure that the regulations are enforceable, robust and fit for purpose. So my first of many questions to the Minister is, will he confirm that a detailed policy paper will be forthcoming, setting out the policy objectives on vaping and how these new regulations will deliver against the objectives? The Labour manifesto made a bold commitment on halving the gap in healthy life expectancy between the richest and poorest regions in England. Tobacco control is the best way to close that gap, and we can't say it enough. The range of diseases that smoking causes is extraordinary, from stillbirths through to asthma in children, heart disease, stroke, dementia in old age, poor mental health and, of course, many, many cancers. And it will never cease to amaze me, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there are people in this place who are happy to be lobbied by the tobacco companies, some of which we've heard from already, including, I'm guessing, the Shadow Secretary of State, knowing full well the damage they cause to individuals, families and communities, as well as our health services. Communities like mine in the northeast of England, where smoking is still the key driver of health inequalities. The cause of 26% of all deaths in the last 50 years, and the cause of 125,000 deaths in the northeast since 2020. In my constituency, the City of Durham, smoking costs us over £95 million a year, with over £3 million being spent on healthcare alone. In County Durham, smoking costs us over £500 million a year, with over £21 million being spent on healthcare. In the North East, the cost is over £2 billion, with healthcare costs at over £93 million. Nationally, smoking is still the greatest cause of preventable death. It's still the leading cause of premature death and disability, and it's still responsible for half the difference in healthy life expectancy between the rich and poor. And it's why I've been in this chamber time and time again to ask for action, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's a tragedy when we consider the further health implications. According to Cancer Research UK, the most deprived communities will not be smoke-free until 2050. So I urge the government to restate their intention to publish a roadmap to a smoke-free country and outline how support will be targeted to those most in need to quit. On mental health, Madam Deputy Speaker, smoking is directly and indirectly linked to poor mental health. Nearly 40% of those who have a severe mental health problem smoke, and smoking accounts for 2/3 of the reduced life expectancy among this group. I want to touch on the polluter pays levy, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Darcy review found that our health service is in real trouble, and the Secretary of State is right that to rebalance supply and demand in our healthcare system, we need a major shift from sickness to prevention. The Cairn Review and the APPG on smoking and health have advocated for a polluter pays levy, one that could raise £700 million per year to create a smoke-free fund. This would ensure that it's the tobacco companies, not the public, who pay for the harm that they inflict. So will the Minister consider this approach to fund the work needed to reduce smoking across society and to protect the NHS? I should also add, Madam Deputy Speaker, that public health initiatives to tackle smoking are remarkably good value for money, and failing to fund efforts to tackle smoking is a false economy. Initiatives like Fresh in the North East, the North East Tobacco Control Programme, has led the way in tackling smoking in our region. And I know that Fresh and others could provide best practice for the department. And the Minister will also know that the UK Government is part of the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And Article 5.3 seeks to protect policy making from industry influence. Influence we've already seen even at this stage of the bill. So will the Minister confirm that the Government will live up to its obligations under the FCTC and commit to protecting this bill from industry influence throughout the parliamentary process and the following regulations? I'm proud to vote for a bill that will improve people's lives and extinguish the injustice that smoking causes to individuals and society. Smoking is never about choice, and it's frankly pathetic that some members have argued that this is an issue of freedom. It's absolutely nothing of the sort. Tobacco companies target children and young people. Smoking is an addiction, and the only free choice is that first cigarette. When someone is in hospital, struggling to breathe because of a smoking-induced lung cancer, where's their freedom? Today, we have the opportunity to give people the freedom to live healthy lives, lives free from disease and inequalities that smoking causes. Thank you.
I now call Liberal Democrat spokesperson Helen Morgan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I can confirm that it's a very long time since anyone asked me for ID to make a purchase, and that moment is even further into the past than the last time I bought a packet of cigarettes, and that experience will be informing some of the comments that I'm going to make today. I will be supporting this legislation today, but it will be a free vote for my Liberal Democrat colleagues, and I'm going to use my speech to explain why. But first of all, the bill is split into two sets of measures. One set of measures dealing with smoking and one set of measures dealing with vaping. And we are 100% supportive of the set of measures dealing with vaping. It's in line with our party policy that was passed at our conference in 2023. I think everybody in this House is united in agreeing that the targeting of nicotine products at young people and children is a shameful practice through the use of bright colours and attractive flavours, and it absolutely needs measures taken to prevent that from happening. I'm the mum of a teenager, lucky me, and I can tell you that he reports some of his friends unable to concentrate, Madam Deputy Speaker, through a 40-minute lesson because they have been exposed to such high levels of nicotine in the vaping products that they're using that they are even more addicted to nicotine than someone who might have taken up smoking many years ago when I was young. So we absolutely welcome the changes to prevent the targeting of vaping at children. And indeed, the recent ban on disposable vapes that was brought in. And we absolutely also acknowledge that vaping is an important part of smoking cessation and that some legal vaping needs to continue into the future. But the introduction of a phased smoking ban is problematic, and not because Liberal Democrats want to see people smoke themselves into an early grave, far from it, but because it raises issues of practicality and it raises issues of civil liberties. And I will run through those now on behalf of my colleagues. So I think the first question is, practically, how will this work? So my son, who I just mentioned, is born in January 2009. He will be one of the first people to benefit from a smoke-free generation, and I sincerely hope that he never takes up smoking. But the reality is, if his friends choose to take up smoking, ones that are just a few weeks older, they will be able to continue to do that for the rest of their lives. And this bill will say that those now children, future adults, will be able to buy tobacco products for themselves, and it will be illegal for them to pass them on to children a few weeks younger than them, like my son. And that's just the problematic enforcement of that causes some concern and leads us to question why there wasn't an alternative way, perhaps, of achieving that, maybe by setting a minimum age to buy cigarettes at a very high level so that most people sort of get through that flourish of rebellious youth and maybe don't take up smoking in the first place. So I think the concerns over practicality are legitimate. And it also raises the spectre of an ID card, because those people who do choose to start smoking will potentially be forced to carry an ID card or some other form of ID with them for the rest of their lives. And that is a concern for a Liberal Democrat who are strongly opposed to requiring people to carry their ID around with them for various issues of privacy and personal liberty. And I think there's also an ideological point for me about discriminating between two people because of their age. We are generally opposed to that in society, and this bill absolutely does that. The concerns about retailers suffering abuse, I think, are also legitimate. They're already suffering from a wave of shoplifting, antisocial behaviour, and some of the abuse that is directed at them is from the enforcement of age legislation for things like alcohol and existing tobacco legislation. And I think we just need to be cognizant that community policing has been decimated under the previous government. We need to be sure that those retailers are fully protected, and this bill creates an extra risk for them. And finally, on the risks, there's a concern for the licensing authorities, which presumably will be the local councils, although we don't have the detail on that yet. Lots of local councils are unable to carry out much more than their statutory duties currently, and so I would appreciate confirmation that licensing is going to be something that's going to be fully funded for them when we see the detail of that, so that they're not put in charge of enforcing something that is just going to be impossible for them. I also want to touch on what for me is quite an important area, which is the creation of a black market. Criminal gangs exploit people, young people in North Shropshire, by getting them hooked on cannabis. And it's an extremely difficult problem. Those young people get into debt to those criminal gangs. They are hooked into that criminality for life. They see things people should never see. And they are extremely damaged by that exploitation. And I do share some concerns that banning tobacco products for people progressively will increase the scope of that black market and the risk for those children. And it's for all of those reasons that some of you may be aware that I abstained on the vote when this legislation was brought through the House the last time round. So it would be a legitimate question to ask me, why have I changed my mind? And the reason is that I met somebody called Linda Chambers. She is a Liberal Democrat councillor in Hull, and she came along to an event organised by Ash to encourage members to support this bill. And Linda was devastated when she lost her husband of 50 years to cardiovascular disease. And along with a number of other speakers at that event who also spoke very powerfully of their own experiences, her loved one had tried on several occasions to give up smoking and had been unsuccessful. The speakers at this event explained that the nicotine addiction had taken away the personal choice of their loved ones to live the lives that they wanted to live, and therefore they weren't exercising their personal choice anymore. And for a Liberal, that's a very, very powerful argument. Personal choice is so important, and addiction really does take that away. Now, you might expect me to have understood that argument perhaps a little bit earlier, as the asthmatic daughter of two smokers who have repeatedly tried to give up over the years and struggled with that issue. And also, having taken up smoking myself, very typically of the daughter of two smokers, and not smoked very much and not smoked for very long, but still occasionally have the odd craving, especially when I'm in a traffic jam, for reasons I can't explain. But it's not funny, is it? Tobacco is uniquely harmful, uniquely addictive, and that's why I'm supportive of the measures we are taking to address it. Another really important and persuasive and powerful argument that I heard in the previous Parliament was when Dame Andrea Leadsom, who was the responsible minister at the time, and Chris Whitty took the time to provide a briefing to Liberal Democrats. And one of the things they highlighted was health inequality. And something that struck me, because at the time I was the co-chair of the Baby Loss APPG, is that pregnant women in the most deprived areas of the country are 21.1% likely to be a smoker while pregnant, whereas in the least deprived parts of the country, they are only 5.6% likely to be a smoker. And this huge difference correlates to a horrifying differential in the stillbirth rate. Women who smoke while they're pregnant are more likely to have a stillbirth, and stillbirth rates in the most deprived areas of the country are 50% higher than in the least deprived areas. And so I think if we are serious about tackling health inequality, rather than just paying it lip service, we do have to take additional measures to tackle those inequalities. So I'm going to support this bill for all those measures for all those reasons I've just outlined. But I do still retain a few concerns, and I'd be grateful if the Minister could address them in his wind-up. The powers in this bill allow the Secretary of State to make any public place or workplace effectively a no-smoking area, which is very far-reaching, and I would prefer to see some measures in the bill introduced in committee stage, which would require him to come back to Parliament before extending the areas affected, really to protect the hospitality industry, which, as honourable members have pointed out, is struggling, and particularly in rural areas. And I would also just point out, I think, the obvious, which that anybody who is currently over 16 could potentially be a smoker for life. And there are many, many people who took up smoking and have already taken up smoking who want to give up and who are unable to. So we must reverse the cuts to the public health budget and the smoking cessation budget to enable these people to benefit from stopping smoking too. The public health budget has been slashed by the Conservatives since 2015, and we would like to see the Secretary of State use the money given over to health in the budget to address this problem. Because a quarter of cancer deaths are caused by smoking, and 75,000 GP appointments every month are for smoking-related illness, and many women will continue to smoke during pregnancy for up to probably another decade. So despite my concerns about all of this, I will be supporting the legislation, just to ensure that people like Linda don't have to lose their loved ones to an addiction that they were unable to end. I would urge the Secretary of State to look at measures to deal with the practical considerations that we've outlined and to support the current generation of smokers to quit if they want to. Thank you.
Mary Glindon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I apologise that I may not be able to stay until the wind-ups because of a long-standing appointment this evening. Even though smoking is the #1 preventable cause of death and ill health, there are still over 6 million smokers in the country today, and the government is right to press on with the Tobacco and Vapes Bill in this Parliament, but I hope that the bill can be improved even more than the version of the bill presented by the last government, and it's a bill that will help the country be smoke-free by 2030. Colleagues may know that I'm a strong advocate for vaping. I have witnessed many of my friends and family make the switch from smoking to vaping, and it's my honour to be chair of the APPG for responsible vaping. We know that vaping is 95% safer than smoking, according to both the King's College and the former Public Health England. It's the most successful tool to help smokers quit, and data from ASH has found that 3 million adult vapers are ex-smokers. I would therefore like to concentrate my comments on vaping in relation to the bill, and I fully support the health message that if you smoke, change to vaping, but if you don't smoke, don't vape. However, urgent government action must now be taken to prevent youth vaping, which has become far too prevalent in recent years, and we've already heard the statistics in the chamber this afternoon. In campaigning on vaping, I have been privileged to work with the industry, and I was disappointed that during the passage of the previous smoking and vaping bill, the previous government did not engage with the industry to help find the best solutions to tackle both youth vaping and the illicit trade, which is largely responsible for children and young people accessing the vape market. And I have to say that John Dunn, the Director General of the UK VIA, at their recent forum had praise for our front bench team in the way that they have already engaged with the industry. I support the industry proposals that I know will help the bill achieve its objectives. And like the industry, I've always supported the introduction of a licensing scheme as a helpful tool for better enforcement of the market, giving trading standards advantages to identify non-compliant businesses, impose tough penalties and close down premises. But I don't understand why restricting the number of shops and supermarkets selling vapes increases regulatory compliance. Shops and supermarkets that sell vapes responsibly shouldn't be penalised, and we need to ensure that the specialist vaping retailers can continue to operate, especially as they provide such a critical service in helping smokers to quit. Flavour names that appeal to under-18s are unacceptable and should and must be banned. However, flavours are a key in helping smokers successfully transition to vaping. Research shows that around 65% of adult vapers find fruit or sweet liquids preferable. If only tobacco flavours are available, many ex-smokers will return to smoking. And according to the government's own impact assessment, restricting vape flavours would mean 87% of adults that vape could be affected. Hopefully, meaning consultation on flavours will lead to a safe solution to curtail youth vaping, but also ensure vaping is an attractive alternative to adult smokers. It can be said that increasing the fixed penalty notices to £200 is not a significant enough deterrent to irresponsible retailers, and when it's compared to the profits made from selling cheap vapes on the illicit market, this fine pales into insignificance. I hope the bill can be amended to increase this fine significantly to act as a real deterrent to those who now happily sell vapes to children. Keeping in mind the 6 million smokers who need help to quit, it's important that while bringing in the strongest measures to prevent underage access to vaping products, the bill must not over-regulate and in doing so undermine the power of vapes as a smoking cessation tool. And just recently, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been pleased to learn of new technical solutions which could help the government end youth vaping. Current laws require age verification at the point of sale, something which has fundamentally failed to stop young people from getting hold of vapes. The government could go further and require continuous age verification at the point of use. I recently met with a company that has developed an open standard technology that can be applied by all manufacturers, which meets regulatory requirements for security and privacy, and can lock or unlock a device at the point of use. Vapes on sale in the UK market could be required to have a secure Bluetooth technology installed, a low-cost chip that can be integrated into vaping products. These chips provide a simple on-off switch that can be controlled via a mobile app. Users would then have to verify their age via the app in the same way as happens when accessing other services. This simple and straightforward approach would mean that no matter how a child got hold of a vape, they would be unable to use it. As this process would be quick and user-friendly, it would not prevent adult vapers from using these products as they currently do. And I hope the Minister will consider looking at this technology in more detail as the bill progresses. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister knows that I am not a lobbyist for the industry. Some people may think I am, but I can categorically say that is not true. I don't even vape myself. But I do want the smoking and vaping bill to be effective. I genuinely believe that by including the vaping industry as a consultee, it will be essential to ensure that this bill helps meet the government's aim to create the first smoking-free generation. And I hope that today the Minister can confirm the industry will be consulted during the progression of the bill.
I call Simon Hoare.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome this bill, and I think the country should welcome the bill and salute the government for effectively taking on, and they've polished and finessed some elements of it, but the bill which was introduced by my right honourable friend in the previous government, and the gracious remarks of the Secretary of State in his opening speech will have resonated on these benches and been appreciated. Madam Deputy Speaker, a lot has happened with our country's relationship with tobacco. I'm pretty certain that if we knew then what we know now with regards to the harms, both societally and in terms of health, that tobacco would have on so many thousands of our citizens, Queen Elizabeth probably would have said to those merchant adventurers, well, thank you very much for bringing it over, please take it back. It wouldn't have taken root, but it has. We've moved through a time when medics were paid by the industry to tell us of the beneficial effects of tobacco. Menthol was good to clear people's lungs, etc. As we know, the medical profession has very much and welcomely changed its tune. My late father-in-law was rather like the honourable gentleman from Suffolk, was an ENT surgeon, and I well remember talking to him of the devastating impacts he saw on people's health and the cost, both in terms to the economy and to the health service, that those terrible and avoidable conditions can have. Now, as I mentioned to the Secretary of State, I no longer need to have proof of ID asked for when I go into shops to buy anything. But I can well remember, and it just goes to show how this country's relationship again with tobacco has changed, that as a young schoolboy, my headmaster at my local primary school seemed to be addicted to Piccadilly cigarettes. I don't know if they still make Piccadilly, and it was my job, I was obviously had the trustworthy face, my job every morning to trot up Wyndham Crescent, to go round the corner into Severn Road, to Tony's the newsagent, and pick up either 20 or 40. You knew it was going to be a bad day if he needed 2 packets of 20, and bring them back. And so trusting was it that a 10-year-old schoolboy or a 9-year-old schoolboy could be given these cigarettes, but so trusting was Tony the newsagent that we didn't have to pay. We did that on a Friday. And there was always 10 pence left over, which would either allow me to have a comic, 2 packets of crisps, or a bag of Chewits. I say this to my children now, who are all either in their teenage years or approaching, and they look with glee, but also as if I'm talking about a different age, which of course we are. What on earth can you buy for 10 pence these days? But as I said in my intervention to the Secretary of State, I welcome this bill, and I was very grateful to him and indeed to the Public Health Minister for a brief conversation we had earlier today with regards to the government's intention not to include within the scope of this bill, or indeed in terms of any future consultation, the prohibition of smoking in hospitality outside areas. I mentioned, and I take the point entirely that the Secretary of State made, that it isn't just the rural hospitality sector, but I know a number of publicans have said to me in my constituency that that really would have been the death knell for their business if smokers were not allowed to have a cigarette and a pint or whatever outside the pub in the designated smoking areas. Their businesses are very marginal, as the Minister knows and the Secretary of State recognises. So I am grateful to him for that. With regards to the licences which the bill envisages, licences are useful to have a record of who is doing what where, and that officialdom in its many guises know who is doing what and where. I would urge the government and local government, if it gets passported down to it, not to see those licences as a cash cow. They shouldn't be a profit centre. The requirements to secure a licence should not be onerous. The constraints of the law as proposed in the bill are very clear, but those who are going about a legal business, other honourable members have made the point that if smoking is so bad, why don't we just stop sales completely? The government isn't going down that route, but we shouldn't make people feel criminal or societal pariahs for selling what is still a legal product to those who would be legally entitled to purchase it. The Honourable Lady who spoke before me, I have to say I disagree almost fundamentally with her assessment of vaping. I have 3 kids at our local high school. Too many of their cohort have got entrapped into vaping, brought in by the colours, the flavours, the smells, the packaging, the novelty factor, etc. And I do fear that too many of them will. I understand entirely the intention of vaping to act as that sort of passport away from tobacco, but for too many it seems to me to be an entrant into smoking and moving onto tobacco, entirely what was not envisaged. So the very robust approach which the bill takes with regards to the vaping sector, I support fundamentally. I would be interested to hear, during the progress of this bill, and possibly when the Minister comes to sum up, a number of concerns are raised, as we know in this debate, about smuggling. One can make something illegal or prohibit something or narrow access to it. It doesn't necessarily, in the first instance, choke off market and demand, and people will seek that. There is clearly going to have to be some robust empowering of HMRC, revenues agents, customs agents and others in order to ensure that we do not see a burgeoning, which we wouldn't want to see, of the black market in tobacco products. And on the Honourable Lady's point, who spoke before me on vaping, I do remember hearing a presentation from British American Tobacco, a point which resonated with me, which is that there are the legal vapes, the ingredients of which we know and are listed. Let me just finish the point and then of course I'll give way. And then of course there's a huge black market, principally coming from China, of vapes which nobody knows what the hell is in. I think an awful lot of parents just think that they're producing steam and have no idea as to the dangerous chemical composition. I think too many teachers and head teachers thought that that was the case, and the learning curve has been sharp and steep, and people are learning. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman, of course.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that from the Honourable Gentleman. I have an interesting thought around the fact that we will have a supply and demand issue and the challenges that that would face from a control perspective. And it's a very nice image you painted of a day gone by where you could send one of the kids down to the shop to pick up something for one of the adults and they'd come back. And I would just ask everyone in the room to consider what kind of world and country we actually want to live in. One where we could send one of the kids down to the shop and pick something up for us, or one where we literally are forced to police people's behaviour in parks. And I think we should think very carefully about what our remit is as a government. Thank you.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman takes me neatly to my closing point, which was I wanted to try and address, and Madam Deputy Speaker, both agree but also clarify the point which the Secretary of State was making. And it speaks to the point that the Honourable Gentleman talked about, which I think, if I understood him correctly, was effectively the sort of civil liberties, freedoms argument. One does not have to be a cherisher of freedom and liberty, as I would hope all of us in this House are, and also be a libertarian. Libertarianism is the extreme form. It is the difference between liberty regulated and controlled, parametered if one will, and liberty laissez-faire. It always strikes me as rather incongruous that libertarians wish to become lawmakers, because most laws are there to control, prohibit, to regulate. It seems like the masochists. Let me just finish. It almost seems like the sort of masochist's nightmare. I am a free market libertarian, and yet I have decided to put myself on the shackles of lawmaking in order to restrict those liberties which I cherish. But the Honourable Gentleman makes a serious point. But we have to, I think, deal with society as it is rather than how we may like it to be. Things have changed. Now, the ultra-libertarian will say, well, seatbelts. Why do we force people to wear seatbelts? People should be free to hurl themselves through a windscreen at speed. Well, why do we have speed limits? The libertarian should be absolutely free to drive at whatever limits, irrespective of the conditions. I remember back at university hearing some eccentric American, sometimes that can be a tautology, but an eccentric American questioning from the absolute extreme wing of libertarianism the merits or otherwise of ages of sexual consent. Why did we impose ages of sexual consent? All of what we do, and the inspiration for doing it, I would suggest, is benign and kindly. Too often, that gets transferred as being paternalistic and patronising. But I like the reference that the Honourable Gentleman, the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Secretary of State made with regards to that approach to lawmaking is very much being in the proud One Nation tradition of the Conservative Party. Because Tories actually like order. We like order, not disorder. And here's a man who adores order nearly as much as he adores Margaret Thatcher. I give way to my honourable friend.
So I thank my honourable friend for giving way, but one of the reasons I got involved in politics because I believe in a free society, and I believe that people should make choices about their own lives. I don't believe the state should be governing the way people live their lives. That doesn't mean we're all extreme libertarians. It just means we believe in freedom with responsibility. And in terms of tobacco, as he's mentioned himself, the attitude to tobacco has changed over the years by evolution. People have naturally decided not to smoke, and surely as a Conservative it's better to educate and let people make their own choices than to impose it on their lives.
Well, my honourable friend makes a very important point, and there's a huge intellectual underpinning to what he has to say, and I readily accept that. But we have had public health campaigns about smoking and the dangers of smoking and tobacco for years. And in some instances it has worked. We have used taxation and the pricing mechanism. My father told my late father told my mother that he was going to give up when cigarettes became 10 shillings a packet in the old money. He eventually gave up when the smoking ban came inside public buildings and the like. So my honourable friend makes a point. But the question then has to remain is, do we allow an unfettered freedom if it only harms the individual who is exercising it? Or do we step in when the exercising of that unfettered freedom has negative impacts on society around you? The Secretary of State and others have dilated perfectly correctly about the impact that has on demand and supply within the National Health Service. A disproportionate amount of resource goes to dealing with smoking-related diseases and illnesses and conditions, which we can actually do something about. We know full well the negative impact of passive smoking on other people's health. So this is not a liberty being exercised which is only, the impacts of which are only limited to the individual. Now, if only it were, my honourable friend would have I would suggest, and I say this respectfully, a stronger point. Provide the information and let the individual take a decision. But the decisions that they take impact so many other people. It affects the productivity of the nation, it affects the productivity of the National Health Service, it affects the health of family and society more widely. So it is, I suggest to him, let me just finish this point if I may, it is an entirely conservative instinct to when you have pulled all the levers and pushed all the buttons in terms of public information, in terms of education, in terms of some forms of prohibition, etc., to then say it has worked up to a point, but not enough and not at the right speed. We are going to have to do something else. Now, I entirely accept that not everybody who would describe themselves as a Conservative, as my honourable friend and I both do, will arrive at that same analysis position that I have. I voted for the bill in its last iteration. I shall vote for it again today because I think it is something where this is the next lever that we need to pull, the next button that we have to push. And I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Thank you for giving way. I guess would the honourable gentleman agree with me that when we have an NHS and a government that is expected to treat people when they are ill, both provide the treatment and pay for the treatment, there is a duty and onus on the government to try and keep people healthy and ensure that that well-known dangers to people's health. This is not a nanny state. It's nudging people to help them make the right choices, because it does cost money to treat people, and we want to save money as well.
The honourable gentleman, I think, makes a very valid point, and one can nudge and prod and push and exhort as much as one can. I think this is probably the final stepping stone in quite a long line of stepping stones in terms of trying to wean people off a dependency on tobacco. Because, let me just close, Madam Deputy Speaker, because the House has been generous with its time, as have you, Madam, with your patience. But let me just echo by endorsing the point which the Secretary of State has made, and indeed other contributors on the government benches. People who have an addiction are not liberal. They're not free. They are trapped by their addiction, and it affects so many areas of their lives. And particularly, if one's terribly well off, you can afford the addiction of tobacco, and it makes not a jot or tittle of difference on a household's budget, income and standard of life. Let me just finish this point. And then I won't, if you may, because I do want to conclude. But the disproportionate hammer blow is felt on families who would describe themselves as poor, on low or fixed incomes. Because when the choice between feeding the addiction and feeding the children comes into play, then feeding the addiction seems to have the trump, the trump hand. And therefore, I think the government is right to have picked up the ball, to have taken this forward. It is an entirely conservative measure. This is not a restriction of liberty in the abstract. This is about public health. This is about taking the data. This is about extrapolating the facts. This is about recognising the harms, and as responsible legislators responding to that in order to make a difference to all of our communities up and down the country.
Tristan Osborne.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And similar to previous speakers, I haven't been challenged on my age, even though I do use moisturiser, so I don't know what that says about my receding hairline, perhaps. So I also want to welcome the right honourable member opposite for his eloquent speech around the One Nation tradition in the Conservatives about supporting this bill. It absolutely is the case that this legislation comes off the back of decades of other bills and acts that have slowly that have acknowledged the challenges around smoking in our society, and I think he eloquently articulates that evolution in our public politic. I also want to celebrate the fact that this bill follows on other landmark acts of Parliament that that came through the Labour government previously, one of which impacted me in the workplace when I worked in the retail industry, and the ban of smoking in workplaces, which had a fundamental change on many people's lives and overnight improved the life chances of many millions of our citizens. And we know this has been debated across this chamber. There is a consensus that smoking remains one of the leading causes of death, claiming 80,000 lives annually and costing the NHS billions of pounds, and some estimates are between 3 and 5 billion. I will give way to my honourable colleague.
Gentleman for giving way. But on that basis, would he also ban alcohol? Would he ban all types of unhealthy foods? Chocolate? Where does it end?
Can I thank my honourable friend for his contribution? And of course, we do have age restrictions on alcohol sales. That is what this bill is purporting to do. And similarly around other substances in society, we have also acknowledged that we look at a proportionate way around their consequences on health. So we do class particular categories of drugs as class A, B and C. So I will say that all of these things need to be taken as individual elements. And so certainly we will look at other proposals. But on this particular element, smoking and tobacco has been widely acknowledged as being a public concern over many decades. I also wish to acknowledge the fact that the vaping industry has, in part, as my right honourable friend has suggested, has seen some positive outcomes in terms of people transferring from cigarettes to vaping, and it has actually been acknowledged as part of the NHS to use those products. But as a former teacher, I have also seen the consequences on young people, and I know that has been acknowledged by many parents in this room as well. I've seen in the classroom, and unfortunately through confiscating, through illicit behaviours of some young people, blue raz lemonade, watermelon bubblegum and strawberry raspberry cherry ice are all flavours of vapes. And the fact is that these are being marketed, whether directly or indirectly, at young people, because we know, and the tobacco industry knows, that the largest number of young people are where they start in terms of use of tobacco-based products. So I saw the first-hand consequences of the proliferation of vaping in schools, and it's actually ubiquitous presence now across my area in Chatham and Aylesford. So I agree with the bill that the removal of disposable vapes, the single-use vapes, that are currently so easily accessible and cynically marketed, is a sensible move and should reverse that recent trend of young people who have never smoked turning to vapes as an initial access point. It should also stop being vapes seen as being gateway to other types of drugs. And sadly, I wish to report that cannabis-based products and other illicit products are gaining ground amongst disposable vape products as well. Madam Deputy Speaker, at the same time, as my colleague has mentioned, preventing millions of single-use electrical devices also blights our local landscapes. Many of these disposable vapes are deposited on roadsides and in parks, and whilst that is not the specific content of this bill in particular, the reality is there are environmental consequences to vapes in our environment. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, the branding of some flavours has been a key driver of youth take-up, and to prevent underage appeal, flavours should be adult-focused and restricted to flavours such as tobacco, menthol, and to a handful of responsibly branded fruit flavours. And I note some in the industry are already promoting that agenda. The age restrictions, I believe, are sensible, and I think that the rising age escalator will be enforceable. Many supermarkets at present already have an age limit well above that is legally required and do challenge you on point of disposal. Very happy to give way, yes.
Thank you so much. Would he agree with me, though, that the upper age escalator could prove difficult later on, particularly in terms of the ability for people selling tobacco? At the moment, if you have a young person who is selling alcohol, they have to get a supervisor who is older to come and allow that. When we have people selling who are born after 2009, who are in their 30s, and everyone else in that shop is in their 30s, who's going to be allowed to sell the tobacco? I wonder whether he has any thoughts on that.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for her contribution? And absolutely, the licensing regime will be looked at in detail. But the reality being is that when I am shopping in a supermarket, I might be sold alcohol by someone who is over the age of 16 at a counter. They will challenge me on my age. I might be correct in saying that I will then be challenged on that age and I will have to prove my age for point of sale. But I'm happy to be corrected if I'm wrong on that. But enforcement is also very welcome. And I was a former council portfolio for licensing, and it was always very difficult when I received messages and emails from residents seeking redress around vaping. Some of the products were being sold in over the counter in premises which were marketing other products as well and very aggressive advertising, but many of these were not licensable, so it was very difficult to challenge around that enforcement. So I welcome the licensing element of this and look forward to greater details. And I also think that councils are ready to take on that mantle of licensing. They license many other types of premises, and this will be simply an addition to that regime, I suspect. And it will challenge bad faith actors and also illicit-based products. And I've been asking questions around digital tax of vaping products to see if we can look at that as a particular sector that we do in regards to other tobacco-based products. So just lastly, Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the bill. I think this will put us again in the front foot as being a world leader in tobacco harm reduction and leading the way in improving standards across cigarette alternatives. And if we get this right, which I believe this bill does, we can maintain a healthy balance around vape usage targeted at the adult market and as a means to reduce addiction to other nicotine-based products as well. And I do believe that this bill has balanced the liberties of individuals to make choices with the responsibility of the state to ensure public health of the most vulnerable and our young people. And I urge colleagues to support the bill. Thank you.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And from the outset, may I declare my interest that I've chaired the all-party parliamentary group for Action on Smoking and Health for 9 years, and in this new parliament I co-chair the same group with the honourable lady opposite. One of the reasons why I am so passionate about stopping young people starting to smoke and indeed encouraging people who do smoke to give up is because of my personal experience. I know the Secretary of State related his personal experience. I think it's right we should declare ours. Both of my parents died from smoking-related cancer. My late mother was only 47 and she was a very heavy smoker all her life. I was then left as a 23-year-old with 3 younger sisters to bring up as a family. I don't want any families in this country to have to go through what our family went through then. So this for me is personal as well as political. And I think it's absolutely right. I listened to the Secretary of State in remarking on the speech made by the former Prime Minister at the Conservative Party conference. He may reflect on the fact that if he examines my Westminster Hall speech some 2 months beforehand, it was almost word for word. I haven't called him out for his plagiarism before.
You should have been Prime Minister.
But anyway, let me say from the outset that this House has had a very long history in terms of tobacco control. Measures have been introduced, mainly, I have to say, from the backbenches. I know clearly that the current government will proclaim the issues of bringing in the ban on smoking indoors. It should be remembered it was a senior Labour backbencher, former member of this House, who had an amendment to the health bill at the time, who said, unless the government does this, I'm going to put this cross-party amendment down and it will be carried by a heavy majority. He didn't need to do that, and I welcomed that provision. I'm delighted that this bill now builds on the bill that was presented in the last Parliament. I was proud to speak in that debate and sit on the Bill Committee as we tried to improve the bill. The then Minister, Andrea Leadsom, took away many of our amendments and said, I don't have the authority to agree these yet, but let us review them in the round. Clearly, we didn't get to the point of actually doing that. It is important to remember that from 2011 to 2023, the smoking number of people smoking dropped from 20% of the population to 11.9%. That is a big fall, and I think the last government should be commended for that. Indeed, the last government, of course, made it illegal in 2012 to display tobacco products at the point of sale. And I well remember I led a debate in Westminster Hall in September 2013 calling for the standardisation of tobacco products to be made mandatory. I have to say both the front bench from the Conservative side and the Labour front bench opposed that position. 2 years later, it was passed by this House. So it does come from a point of view that the backbenches lead and governments often follow. At the same time, children were protected from harmful second-hand smoke, with a law making it illegal to smoke in a vehicle for anyone aged under 18 inside. Very difficult to enforce. And I remember many colleagues saying, if you can't enforce it, it won't happen. But I think most members remember sitting in a car where their parents were smoking and suffering that second-hand smoke. We won that argument. That was once again a backbencher, senior backbencher, Alex Cunningham, who brought that forward, and we were proud to support it. And we won the argument on the smoke-free generation. And Jeremy Hunt, as the then Health Secretary, built the cross-party consensus then, and we then reached the consensus on raising the age of sale for tobacco by 1 year every year. And the vote following the second reading of the Tobacco and Vapes Bill last time was rightly backed by a huge majority across this House. Now, I welcome these new measures. I welcome the amendments that have been introduced to the original bill. And it does indeed take into account most, if not all, of the amendments that we proposed at committee. The government has not yet, though, met the standard set by the last government in addressing smoking amongst the 5.6 million current smokers in England. The last government committed £15 million in funding for mass media campaigns, another £30 million for enforcement, and an additional £70 million for local stop smoking services. I note the Secretary of State mentioned the £70 million for smoking cessation services, but not the other items. I wonder, when the Minister responds, will he encourage the position of the Swap to Stop scheme to support adult smokers to switch to vapes and have a national financial incentive programme particularly aimed at pregnant women who want to quit smoking? And so will the government commit to that same level of support? Now, today, the government have confirmed funding for stop smoking services and for enforcement. That's welcome, but only if it's sustained for the next 5 years, in line with the commitments made by the previous government. I'm also concerned that the enforcement duties in this bill are greater than before, but that's not been matched by additional funding. So can the Minister confirm that a full assessment of the cost of enforcement will be undertaken as a matter of urgency and the funding reviewed following this and the passage of the bill? Now, between 2022 and 23-24, we saw the biggest single drop in maternal smoking rates since records began. They dropped from 8.8% to 7.3%. That's an 18% decline in the number of women smoking during pregnancy. The fall was a credit to the services established under the last government to support women to quit. Keeping up this level of progress will not be easy, but by maintaining the world-leading national financial incentive scheme, this rate of decline can be maintained, giving children the gift of a smoke-free start in life. However, the funding for this scheme is due to come to an end in March next year. So will the Minister please confirm whether the government will extend this scheme and ensure that every baby gets the best possible start in life, something I know that his predecessor would have strongly supported. Now, most of this bill comes from the Cairn review that was held. There is one item which is certainly not in this bill, which I think should be. So the current difficult fiscal environment in which the government finds itself means that discussions on funding can lead to tense shoulders on the other side. However, I bring good news. There is a way to raise revenue by passing the cost directly on to tobacco companies, those that are responsible for the blight on our population's health and wealth. So will the Minister agree to come to the APPG and address this so that we can actually talk about the implementation of a polluter pays tobacco levy on the profits of big tobacco, addressing issues with both market prices and limiting the profitability of the industry? That can all be done without impacting the cost of tobacco to the consumer or indeed on the wholesale market. Now, as co-chair of the All-Party Group, I want to congratulate the government for adopting so many of the amendments that the All-Party Group put forward in the last Parliament. This includes the introduction of a licensing scheme, and I'm pleased that the bill indicates this scheme will be more robust than the current scheme for alcohol. That means it can be used to actually improve public health, which we would all agree with, I'm sure. I also tabled an amendment in the last committee stage to require age verification for everyone who purchases tobacco. This would aid enforcement and simplify the process for shop workers who would not have to guess whether customers are over the legal age of sale, or indeed explain to some customers why they're being asked for proof of age. So the requirements to ask for proof of age have been strengthened but not mandated. So could the Minister look at this and see if a mandatory approach to age verification has been considered, and if he will actually introduce this as we go through the committee stage of the bill? I also welcome the ban on vape sponsorship and advertising, which was once again discussed at committee stage previously. The promotion of vaping products for anything other than as a smoking cessation does not support public health goals. However, I'm pleased that the bill ensures that public health organisations can still promote vapes as a quit smoking aid. So can the Minister confirm, when he winds up, that the Advertising Standards Agency will work with public health organisations to ensure that this works in practice and smokers can still be informed about the benefit of switching, but more importantly, of giving up tobacco altogether? Now, this bill also includes new powers on extending smoke-free places and powers to designate smoke-free places as vape-free. It's a shame that the consultation of where these powers should apply was curtailed before the bill ever reached Parliament, because obviously we need to have an open debate on this subject, which will be better led by the evidence rather than decisions being made behind closed doors in the Ministry. So could the Minister look at that aspect to see if we can get a proper consultation so that all members of the public can actually participate? Now, the bill also consolidates many existing powers around tobacco control and brings them into one place. I welcome that proposal. And this will hopefully ensure that legislation is future-proofed against any loopholes or escape clauses. We know how hard the big tobacco works to get around the legislation we pass in this place. I also want to raise an issue which I do not believe is covered by this bill, but I'll stand to be corrected, and that is the issue of chewing tobacco, which may be covered by the legislation, but I'm not quite clear. For example, pun is often used mixed with tobacco and is sold differently with different products in different outlets. It's sold loose, so it's very difficult to monitor. Now, existing laws around oral tobacco are often not enforced properly anyway, and therefore the populations who use these products, which tend to come from the Indian subcontinent, often do not realise the risks they are running. And we do know that the prevalence of mouth and throat cancers, and particularly amongst the people originating from the Indian subcontinent, is prevalent. And we need to combat that and actually make sure that it's properly regulated. So when we get to the point of regulations, will the Minister look at the regulations on all forms of tobacco and that they are properly enforced with resources to support this, particularly for trading standards? So finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to congratulate the House on the continued consensus on reducing smoking and pause just a moment to mark the significance of this bill returning to Parliament. I'm very proud that it was a Conservative government who first introduced this policy. No other consumer product kills up to 2/3 of its long-term users. It is uniquely lethal and requires a regulatory approach. Government intervention is justified against this addiction that steals the health and wealth of our population. And to those that say there's a matter of freedom of choice, there is. The freedom of choice is to take that first cigarette, and after which you're addicted for life. And people either have to try and quit up to 30 times, as we've said, or alternatively face a life, particularly in later life, of shortened life and indeed horrible deaths. So we have been, in this country, a world leader in tobacco control, standing up to big tobacco's repeated efforts to block our progress. So the creation of a smoke-free generation would have been absolutely unthinkable a few years ago. That it's so close, and we can see it coming now, it's so close, it will be a position that will be a credit to both this Parliament and the last. And to the Minister who's going to reply, I remember him saying that it will be a Labour government that's created a smoke-free UK, actually smoke-free England by 2030. Let's hope we can actually do it faster than that.
Yeah. Jenny Riddell-Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I start by welcoming this bill, which will create the first smoke-free generation, with children turning 15 this year never legally being able to be sold tobacco. As we look to reform and transform our NHS service and improve health outcomes for our country, we cannot do so without also tackling the root causes. The long-term chronic health issues that stem from smoking and the impact that this has had on our NHS are well known and have been well talked about today and do not need rehearsing by me here now. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's worth noting that less young people are taking up smoking each year. And this is good news and should be welcomed by both sides, by all sides of the House. The proportion of adults aged 16 and over who said they smoked cigarettes in the UK decreased significantly from 12.7% in 2021 to 11.2% in 2022, continuing the downward trend seen since 1974. In Suffolk, more broadly, we've also seen recent research by Go Smoke Free, whose analysis of ONS figures between 2015 and 2023 show that adults who smoke in Suffolk have declined to 10.6%, down from 16% in 2016. But this positive downward trend doesn't mean that young people are safe from the addictions of smoking, or indeed that further interventions by this government are not needed. Because alongside the decrease in young people taking up smoking and the decline in adults in Suffolk smoking, we've seen an increase in young people and children taking up vaping. This vaping epidemic amongst children and young people should be a great concern to us all, across both sides of this chamber. Madam Deputy Speaker, in 2023, 20% of children had tried vaping. That was almost double the figure from 2020, before the first COVID lockdown. This rapid trajectory is frightening, and I share the concerns of many parents who have written to me and expressed their concerns about the availability of vapes, the marketing of them, and so often it feels that it is targeted directly at children. We know disposable vapes are the product of choice for the majority of children vaping today, and I therefore welcome the ban on disposable vapes that this bill will bring forward. This new legislation will not only protect the environment, but it will help make huge strides in reducing the appeal of vapes to young people and help to keep them out of the hands of the most vulnerable children as well. I also welcome this bill's drive to ban the advertising and sponsorship of vapes and nicotine products and allow the regulation of the flavours, packaging and display of vapes so they cannot be marketed to appeal to children. It is astonishing that it is currently legal for vapes to be sold from locations such as the back of taxis, toy stores and confectioners. This practice must stop, and I am glad that this bill seeks to tackle this. This, in particular, will be a huge welcome to constituents in Suffolk Coastal. In my constituency, we have vape shops that are clearly targeting children and young people and advertising products along suites in a clear attempt to market and sell to those aged under 18. Residents in Felixstowe have been rightly outraged by the recent opening of an American sweet and vape store right on the high street in a prime location that is so clearly targeting children. I hope that under the terms of this bill, stores like this will be in breach of the law, and I will follow the detail closely. I am reassured too that the £200 fixed penalty notice will enable trading standard officers to act on the spot to clamp down on underage sales. This bill is welcomed, and it should be welcomed by both sides of the House. I look forward to voting in favour of it later, and I do so on behalf of the residents in my constituency who have expressed their direct concerns with me since I was elected.
After this speech, I will be imposing a 6-minute time limit. James MacCleary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the opportunity to speak in this debate that seeks to change the way our society approaches smoking and vaping, particularly for future generations. Let me start by saying that I've never smoked in my life, nor would I ever wish for my children or anyone else's to pick up the habit. Smoking is undeniably dangerous, highly addictive and a significant burden on public health. The government data is stark. Smoking causes 80,000 deaths in England every year, and it costs the NHS and the economy billions. At the same time, however, I firmly believe in individual choice. It is not the role of the state to dictate every aspect of a person's lifestyle. Smoking, like alcohol, is harmful. For those members who have made the argument that the justification for banning smoking is that the practice also harms others, I would ask them why we do not also ban the consumption of alcohol that places a massive burden on the NHS, as well as contributing to violent crime, including, with yesterday's White Ribbon Day in mind, domestic violence. Should we not also look at gambling, which is also highly addictive and destroys families all over the country? Instead, we educate people and we provide support for those who wish to quit. I believe that this is the balance that Liberalism stands for, freedom with responsibility. On vaping, the bill takes a much-needed step forward. We know that vaping is increasingly marketed in ways that appeal to children, from brightly coloured packaging to sweet, toy-like flavours. This is unacceptable. The Liberal Democrats have long called for tougher regulation of vapes, and I welcome the provisions to ban advertising, restrict packaging and flavours, and enforce age restrictions. These are sensible measures that will protect young people without penalising adults who use vaping as a tool to quit smoking. In fact, of course.
Madam Deputy, the Honourable Gentleman probably is aware of this, but there's a lot of safety issues over vapes and smoking, especially for young people. One of the issues seems to be that it's unknown just yet what the effect that vapes may have on adults, but even more so on children. Does he, for that reason, agree with me when it comes to the issue of vaping, that there must be further consideration, safety issues given before we can let young people fully use it?
I think the Honourable Member makes an important point, and indeed my colleague, the member for Bath, has already raised in a debate in this House the issue of spiced vapes, and I think there are a lot of concerns about safety relating to vaping, and hopefully this bill can start to address some of those issues. And as a party, we earlier supported the move by the government to ban single-use vapes on environmental grounds. Vaping has a role in smoking cessation, but it's got to be regulated, as the Honourable Member points out, to prevent harm to children. On smoking, however, the bill ventures into more contentious territory in my view. The proposal to ban the sale of tobacco products to anyone born on or after the 1st of January 2009 is somewhat problematic. While I appreciate the ambition behind creating a smoke-free generation, I worry about the long-term implications of this measure. For one, history teaches us that outright bans often lead to unintended consequences. As we've seen with other prohibitions, a black market can emerge, making it harder to regulate the quality and safety of tobacco products. Then there is the question of principle. Should the state prevent adults, grown consenting adults, from engaging in legal activities. I believe it must tread carefully when legislating against personal freedoms, even when those freedoms carry risk. A more effective approach would be to invest in public health measures such as smoking cessation programmes, early cancer detection and better treatment facilities. The bill also grants sweeping powers to the Secretary of State to declare any public space smoke-free. While I support protecting children in playgrounds, schools and hospitals, these powers go far beyond that. They remove the requirement that a space must pose a significant risk of smoke exposure to be designated as smoke-free. This raises concerns about potential overreach, which is understandably creating concern in the hospitality and nighttime industry sectors. I would urge clarification on this when this bill gets to committee stage. Madam Deputy Speaker, smoking rates in this country are already declining, particularly amongst young people. In 2021, just 1% of school pupils reported smoking regularly, compared to 30% in 1996. This trend is encouraging, and it suggests that education and public health initiatives are working. So while I share the government's goal of reducing smoking and vaping rates, I believe this bill goes beyond what is necessary or proportionate. We should focus on supporting people to make better choices, not removing those choices altogether. There is much to welcome and commend in this bill, and I congratulate the Secretary of State and the government for bringing it forward. I hope the government will consider refining its approach in some of the areas I've raised in the committee stage, balancing public health priorities with the liberal principle of individual freedom.
Dr. Becky Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is an absolute privilege to be able to take part in this debate today and to hear the broad consensus around this excellent bill across the House. We have come a long way since the 2004 White Paper proposed a smoking ban in almost all public places in England and Wales. Smoking on public transport, and as we've previously heard, and in workplaces, now feels inconceivable thanks to decades of work from campaigners and public health professionals, and thanks to bold action from government. As a public health consultant, I would like to pay special tribute to my public health colleagues who work so tirelessly in this area. From the seminal research in 1956 undertaken by Sir Richard Doll and team, which first established the link between smoking and lung cancer, something we take for granted today, through to the smoking cessation advisors who work daily to help people combat this destructive addiction. Mark Twain is reported to have said, "Quitting smoking is easy. I've done it thousands of times." In my career to date, I have been fortunate enough to undertake smoking cessation training, and I can testify to the incredible amount of hard work and sheer determination that both the quitter and the advisor put in to overcome the nicotine receptors that demand to be fed. This is an addiction, not a choice. So better by far to not start this destructive habit in the first place. Currently, every day, around 350 young adults still start smoking, and around 160 people are diagnosed with cancer caused by smoking. Smoking, as we've heard, is still the leading cause of premature death and disability in the UK, and is responsible for half the difference in healthy life expectancy between rich and poor. And we've heard other honourable members across this House talk about inequalities and how this will really contribute to reducing those appalling health inequalities in this country. So it is right that this bill will phase out the sale of tobacco and create a smoke-free generation. Already, fewer and fewer people smoke, and this legislation will increase that rate of decline. Increasing the age of sale by 1 year every year, we can expect to see smoking rates among 14 to 30-year-olds reach zero by 2050. And as a mum of 2 young sons myself, I greatly welcome that. I welcome too the increased powers to tackle vaping in this government's bill. Vaping can be an effective aid for adult smokers to quit, but much tougher measures, as we've heard again in this debate, are needed to regulate products designed to appeal to young people. As ASH, the Action Group on Smoking and Health, put it, vaping is an adult quitting aid, not a children's toy. Yeah. The Chief Medical Officer also further underlines this by stating, if you smoke, vaping is much safer. If you don't smoke, don't vape. Marketing vapes to children is utterly unacceptable. This bill will give the government far greater control over the marketing and design of vapes and the flexibility to adjust regulations in the future if the market or evidence changes. And as smoking rates continue to decline, I will give way, absolutely.
Would the Honourable Member agree as well that's why it's important we control vending machine sales as well?
I thank the Honourable honourable member for that intervention, and I wholeheartedly agree. Vending machines are often forgotten, but it is incredibly important that we understand that sales and marketing use that in a way that we often don't understand. So thank you for that intervention. I will give way, yeah.
But then we should also look at online sales. Lots of young people are actually purchasing products online. So what is the bill saying about that, if I can ask the Minister?
Thank you to my honourable member for that intervention. I don't disagree either. As I say, the bill will give the government far greater control over the marketing design of vapes and the flexibility to adjust regulations in the future. Life evolves outside of this chamber, and we need to be able to evolve with it flexibly. I will continue. Alongside the measures in this bill, this government has made important commitments to integrating smoking cessation into routine care and ensuring the most disadvantaged groups are not left behind as we move towards a smoke-free Britain. When I was undertaking my training in public health, a director of public health told me that our profession is where medicine meets politics. I'm not sure how he'd feel about me going into politics, but there we go, that's what he said. In this bill, I am delighted to see the evidence and data from my profession working in synergy with the policy development of this government to bring forward a bill that will allow our young people to enjoy healthier futures and to allow us all to live in a healthy environment. My thanks to all members across the House for their work on this, and I offer my wholehearted support to this bill.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak as a non-yet reformed smoker, being in the pre-contemplative phase of my addiction. But I'm pleased to stand here today in favour of this bill, part 2 of which specifically relates to Scotland. While this is only the second reading of the bill, it certainly looks to be a promising piece of legislation that will benefit lives across the UK. Smoking is the leading cause of preventable deaths in both Scotland and the UK. As parliamentarians, we have a duty to safeguard future generations from the addiction that smoking is and reduce preventable deaths across the UK. Now, my own unique contribution to this debate is this. I'm very concerned by what I see as the rise in the number of leading actors in television and film whose characters are featured as smokers. I invite you to consider if I'm right the next time you enjoy your favourite programme or film. It seems to me this is the most subliminal form of product placement on our screens these days, and I often wonder to what extent the tobacco industry might be behind this in the form of indirect sponsorship. Now, turning to the matter at hand, as members will know, healthcare is a matter devolved to the Scottish Parliament. The Scottish Government's record on smoking controls is excellent. Scotland was the first UK nation to introduce an indoor smoking ban. Scotland led the overhaul of the tobacco sale and display law. Scotland established the UK's first tobacco retail register in 2011. And Scotland is in the process of implementing the deliberately ambitious goal of a tobacco-free nation by 2034. At this point, I want to pay tribute to my party colleague, Kirsten Oswald, the former member for East Renfrewshire, who dedicated a significant amount of her time and effort in this place on this important issue. During the debate on the last Parliament's Tobacco and Vapes Bill, Kirsten powerfully stated that any arguments put forward about personal choice or personal freedom make no sense at all when we're talking about children and a highly addictive substance. Smoking is not a free choice, it is an addiction. Members, we have the opportunity with this bill to directly address not only preventable deaths, but also to address the issue of youth vaping. While decades of research have shown the harm that smoking does, we are only at the very beginning of our understanding of the harm that might be caused by vaping. There is emerging evidence in this area, but as yet we simply do not know enough. But we can act in a preventative way. Now, I heard what the member for Newcastle upon Tyne East and Wallsend said about 95% of the benefits being achieved. I'm not so sure that the evidence supports that. I'm more inclined to support what the member from North Dorset said on that point. The rise in youth vaping across the UK is very concerning. Vaping products are not intended to be used by children, but we know all too well of the shocking usage of these products by children. In 2022, 3% of 11-year-olds, 10% of 13-year-olds and 25% of 15-year-olds in Scotland said they used an e-cigarette in the last 30 days. To that end, the SNP welcomes the range of new powers in the bill to regulate the sale of vapes aimed at young people and to tackle youth vaping. Measures to tackle youth vaping cannot come soon enough. The SNP supports the new minimum age regime for tobacco sales, meaning that no one born in 2009 or later will ever legally purchase cigarettes. This will aid in the government's goal, the Scottish Government's goal of a smoke-free Scotland that I've already alluded to. I note that the bill follows lengthy work cooperation between the UK and devolved governments, including a UK-wide consultation on tackling smoking and vaping. I am pleased to see that this work was productive, with Scottish Government requests, for example in clauses 52 and 53, being added to the bill. I note that the Scottish Government had previously laid a legislative consent memorandum to the Scottish Parliament and will do so again. Intergovernmental work and cooperation is vital on this island, especially on a topic as important as tackling preventable deaths. For Scotland, it is vital that the UK Secretary of State sets out as soon as possible after the passage of the bill and in consultation with the Scottish Government and other devolved governments his plans to make best use of the various UK-wide powers contained in the bill. This is particularly so for the powers relating to the specifications and sale of vapes, which are vital to tackle youth vaping. To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am happy to support this legislation, as are my colleagues in the SNP, and I look forward to seeing further cooperation between the UK and Scottish Governments to tackle this important issue.
Darren Paffey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very proud to be part of a government that is creating the first smoke-free generation and protecting the British public, as it will do for my constituents in Southampton, Itchen, protecting them from avoidable illnesses and death. So I very much welcome this. As others have mentioned throughout this debate, I'm one of those people who can only ever dream of being asked for ID these days. In fact, I am so old, I can remember growing up seeing huge billboards with cigarette advertisements on them, on bus stops, sponsoring entire sporting events. What a different time we live in now. And that's because our knowledge has progressed so much. We now know that there is no safe level of exposure to smoking or even to second-hand passive smoking. We know the consequences of this, as the Secretary of State set out. 75,000 GP appointments attributed to smoking every single month. 80,000 smoking-related deaths each year. One person admitted to hospital every minute because of smoking. All at a cost to the NHS of over £3 billion a year, adding to that pressure that we know is at breaking point. But then there's the economic cost. £18 billion of productivity squandered each year, £18 billion up in smoke, dare I say. Phasing out this harmful addiction is not just a health priority, it's a societal and economic necessity. The urgency is especially clear in Southampton, where we had 527 emergency hospital admissions per 100,000 people for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, a disease from which my mum died, despite never having smoked, but being the child of heavy smoking parents. Compare that 527 to the average in England of 326 per 100,000. This represents a 61% higher rate in Southampton. So there is clearly urgent need for this bill, for change nationally and in my city. Because I don't want the children of Southampton Itchen to have to grow up to being vulnerable to the same smoking-related health issues that my generation and the generations before us did. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, this excellent bill will rewrite the culture around smoking and vaping, freeing our next generation from addiction, from school-age pressures and from harmful trends. But despite these troubling statistics, there is some great work to tackle this issue going on locally too. Before the election, I visited Dr. Cathwood Townsend and her team at a research-based project called Life Labs. This is a collaboration between the University of Southampton, the hospital, and NIHR Biomedical Research Centre, and it's centred around improving the health education of young people through practical visits to their labs at University Hospital Southampton and involving young people in their research processes. One of their recent studies found that some vaping brands are actually designed to mimic sweets, and that some children are persuaded that there is an element of healthiness with fruit-flavoured vapes. Imagine being a company that plays on that. Imagine being a company that knows about the risks of vaping, that knows about the lung scarring it can cause, the asthma, the increased risk of cardiovascular disease, the exposure to chemicals, metal in the aerosol being breathed in. And yet that same company wraps this product up in bright colours and fruit flavours and deliberately markets that towards our children, knowing the addictive nature of vapes, knowing the vulnerability of children and the social pressures that they face. The job of business is to contribute to the economy, to innovate, to create jobs and wealth, not to run rampant with our children's health in order to make a quick buck for their shareholders. So effective educational programmes like Life Labs and the sensible legislation and action of this government working in tandem will promote better understanding and reducing harm. We've seen before what legislation can do. When smoking under 18 was banned, when proxy purchasing was banned, when advertising on cigarette packaging was banned, all of these vital steps drove down the smoking rate. And now, again, if you'll forgive me, it's time to stub out this habit once and for all. Madam Deputy Speaker, this Labour government is doing what's right by the youth of today. We're prioritising health over profit and ensuring that the next generation can grow up free from this addiction and its preventable diseases. Today, with cross-party support, I hope, we're taking another ambitious step towards a future where our children's well-being comes first, and I'm proud to be part of that.
We're a Hockhouse. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate the government on its very strong stance it's taking on tobacco and protecting children. But, and the Minister will already know what is coming, when it comes to refillable vapes, this bill is missing the mark. Research conducted by Professor Chris Pudney at the University of Bath has uncovered that 1 in 6 vapes confiscated in schools contained the synthetic drug spike. 1 in 6 vapes, a highly addictive and dangerous drug commonly found in prisons. This drug causes very, very dangerous health conditions, including damage to vital organs. On our streets, users are often slumped in a semi-conscious state, unable to function. In our schools, children are collapsing. Some rush to intensive care, others left battling lifelong addiction. The highly addictive nature of spike makes it a gateway to criminal activity, coercion, and abuse. I have spoken about this alarming issue on several occasions now, and I have had some assurances from the government, but so far I haven't seen anything in this bill. The bill as it currently stands will not do anything to stop the trend of spike vapes in schools. Because the vapes that contain spice are almost all refillable ones. Refillable vapes are rechargeable and feature an empty pod that can be filled up with a liquid of choice. Banning disposable vapes will not address this problem. Many of the confiscated vapes containing spice were made to look exactly like a normal product from a shop, and they are usually sold as if they contain THC, also an illegal product in this country, I agree. Children are inadvertently consuming spice while under the impression it is cannabis. While vapes containing THC are widespread in parts of the United States where they are legal, importing them to the UK is costly and difficult. Spice, however, is cheap, readily available, and highly addictive. Dealers exploit this by passing off spice as cannabis, preying on young people and putting them at serious risk. This drug has the potential to condemn young people, in particular vulnerable young people, to a life of crime and addiction. This bill, Madam Deputy Speaker, and when we do have bills like this, we have an opportunity to make them as strong as possible. And I know there are other issues that are associated with spike vapes, but I do urge the government to really look at what it can do to strengthen the bill to address this serious problem. There are opportunities for this. Focusing solely on disposable actually risks backfiring, pushing demands towards refillable vapes, which are even easier to tamper with for illegal use. And has the government really prepared for the potential unintended consequences of this government? I hope the government acknowledges what I have raised. I'm really looking forward to seeing through the further progress of this bill that this is being addressed. I am supporting the government on its very strong stance on what it wants to achieve, but I hope the bill can be further strengthened. Thank you.
Hear, hear. Madam Deputy Speaker, this piece of legislation carries immense significance for the health of our nation, and I welcome the steps being taken to protect people from the harms of tobacco, create a smoke-free generation and tackle youth vaping. We are all too aware that smoking remains the biggest cause of preventable illness and death in our country today, with decades of evidence in support of this. 1 in 4 cancers are driven by smoking. Around 160 people every day are diagnosed with a smoking-related cancer. Smoking causes asthma, it causes stillbirths, it causes dementia, and the evidence around second-hand smoke is overwhelming, with increases in the rates of cancer, heart disease, stroke, COPD, the list goes on. Tobacco consumption is a primary driver of health inequalities right across the country, with mortality rates ascribed to smoking in the most deprived areas more than double than in the least deprived areas, as we've already heard. But this bill is not just about health, it's also about alleviating the economic burden on our healthcare system. According to Action on Smoking and Health, smoking-related illnesses cost the NHS £1.9 billion each year in England alone. In mid-Cheshire, the cost of smoking exceeds £52 million annually, with over £2 million in direct healthcare costs alone. By curbing tobacco use, we can alleviate some of this financial strain and redirect those resources towards more urgent health needs. Investing in prevention is far more cost-effective than treating the diseases caused by tobacco. With the time I have, I want to focus on the regulation on vaping that this bill brings forward, because this is the area where it's important that we strike the right balance between reducing harm from tobacco and protecting young people. Vaping has a role to play in helping adults to quit smoking, and there are estimates that as many as an extra 70,000 people in England quit smoking by using vapes as an aid. However, youth vaping has more than doubled in the last 5 years, while almost 6 times more 11 to 17-year-olds vape now compared to a decade ago. Many vaping products have very clearly been targeted at children in terms of the packaging, the flavours, the marketing. Whilst vaping is less harmful than tobacco, the vast majority of vaping liquids still contain nicotine, which is highly addictive and more impactful on the brains of children when they're trying to quit. And many of the long-term health effects of inhaled ingredients such as colours and flavours are unknown. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's our responsibility to safeguard the health of our communities, particularly our children, who are vulnerable to the allure of smoking and vaping. I certainly welcome the bill's emphasis on addressing the need for more responsible regulation of vaping products, and the measures around giving the Secretary of State the power to require producers to produce studies into the ingredients of their products will be a vital tool in demonstrating the long-term effects of what is being put into vaping liquids. The Tobacco and Vapes Bill is a crucial piece of legislation that aims to tackle a critical public health challenge, promote informed choices and alleviate economic burdens to ultimately help us achieve our ambition to create a smoke-free UK. And that's why I'm proud to support this important bill.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I noticed from opening comments that the opposition have a free vote on this legislation, as do the Lib Dems. Can I assure the Minister that the Ulster Unionist Party group in this House are 100% behind this bill? So I am. Madam Deputy Speaker, I sincerely hope, in regards to this second reading, I sincerely hope that in this instance it's second time lucky for this bill, because prior to getting elected to this House, I was Minister of Health in Northern Ireland in the re-established Assembly when it came back in February of 24 of this year, and this piece of legislation was going through this House at this stage. And despite it being hugely challenging in regards to the pressures that were there, and I welcome and I thank the much appreciated attitude actually from the previous Public Health Minister, Andrea Leibson, in regards to being able to work with the devolved assemblies to making sure that the then bill was a Four Nations approach. And I thank the government for continuing that approach, and like the Honourable Member for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East mentioned in regards to the Scottish Government, there was a legislative consent motion went through the Northern Ireland Assembly, but more importantly at that stage it got the full support of the four parties within the Northern Ireland Executive, because it was only right and proper that the profound public health benefits were also given the opportunity to extend to Northern Ireland. Like Scotland, Northern Ireland had been included in the UK-wide consultation exercise, which had been completed and closed by December 23. And there was a particularly strong support for the measures from the people back home, because the consultation actually received a proportionally higher response rate in terms from the Northern Ireland population compared to the UK-wide response. And actually, Madam Deputy Speaker, while 62.5% of UK respondents reported that they were in favour of an ambitious smoke-free generation proposal, the Northern Ireland figure actually stood at 79% being in favour, and that was by far the greatest support amongst all the UK regions. Similarly, support was much higher in Northern Ireland for a range of other proposals, such as restricting the vape flavourings and displays. Madam Deputy Speaker, some of the attractive flavours that are put out there to attract children have been mentioned in this House, but there's also a move now to those flavours and those labellings and those namings that are moving it up through the age groups. Like there's flavours out there now, brain freeze, colour custard, so it's moving on from the young people that they've already got addicted into those early teens as well, to making sure that those addictions actually embed, and I think that's why it's important that this legislation addresses that. So whilst I'm glad of the support that many of the measures actually had across Northern Ireland, we also need to remain mindful that if this bill was passed, it will actually also be a literal lifesaver for decades to come. Tobacco use is a leading cause of health inequalities in Northern Ireland. It's a tragedy, but it's an avoidable one. That the lung cancer incidence rate in the most deprived areas of Northern Ireland is actually around 2.5 times the rate seen in the least deprived areas. A recent Department of Health in Northern Ireland Health Inequalities report actually showed that the healthy life expectations of a woman in the most deprived areas of Northern Ireland to the least deprived actually stands at 14.2 years. Not months, years. And that's the differential that this legislation and other parts like it will actually see. In addition, our smoking rates in the most deprived areas are typically almost 3 times the rate in those least deprived areas. So I fully support any and all efforts to dissuade people, and especially young people, from taking up the habit in the first place. This tobacco and vapes bill goes even further than the bill that fell before the last general election. I'll be honest and admit that at that time I was hugely frustrated that the previous bill wasn't given the time to succeed, and I really feared that once in a generation chance to actually do something transformative may have been missed. But looking at the bill now, I'm pleased that instead of that potential being lost, in fact I believe that today's bill, with all its enhancements, has the potential to become even more impactful. And in particular, I know that my successor as Minister of Health and my current party leader, Mike Nesbitt, has been able to use the little extra time to really consider the licensing provisions. So whilst Northern Ireland's current tobacco retailers register is a helpful enforcement tool, it has limitations, and as such a new licensing regime would be another significant step forward for my constituents. I do acknowledge, however, that this bill, just as was the case for its predecessors, is complicated by our somewhat messy post-Brexit arrangements, but I take reassurance from the last government and this government that that won't be a case, because, Madam Deputy Speaker, surely both can't be wrong.
Alex Bowers-Curtis.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow such powerful contributions from both sides of the House, my honourable friends for Suffolk Council, Southampton Itchen, Worthing West and Mid Cheshire, and also on the other side of the House, the honourable members for North Dorset and Harrow East, Bath, and the entire UUP delegation of the honourable member for Southampton. I rise to support this landmark legislation, Madam Deputy Speaker, which is an important step towards delivering on this government's manifesto commitment to ensure that the next generation can never legally buy cigarettes and to create the first smoke-free generation. This step is overdue and is a natural step towards tackling the scourge of smoking, which claims around 80,000 lives a year in the United Kingdom. Smoking is the #1 preventable cause of death, disability and ill health in our United Kingdom, and it is responsible for 1 in 4 of all cancer deaths, killing up to 2/3 of its users. In Wales, tobacco causes 3,100 Welsh cancer cases every year, and smoking is still the leading cause of cancer in Wales. Cancer does not respect borders, and so this bill will serve the health interests of our entire United Kingdom, and I welcome that. And I also welcome the Welsh Government's commitment to support this legislation and bring it into force in Wales from 2025. In fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Welsh Government have been well ahead of the curve on this issue. As far back as 2016, my constituency colleague Mark Drakeford brought forward legislation that would have banned cigarette use in public spaces. That legislation fell due to shameless politicking by Plaid Cymru, who I note have not been here at all for this debate on this important second reading. Rather than agree with the Welsh Government and bring forward what would have been landmark public health legislation, they were joined by the Welsh Conservatives then and UKIP, if you remember them, who all cited this as unnecessary government regulation. So as a result, Plaid Cymru sided with the populist right in Wales to make a political point, and the people of Wales were worse off because of it. Shame. Undeterred, in 2021, the Welsh Government launched its Tobacco Control Action Plan, which includes actions to protect children and young people from the dangers of vaping, including tighter regulations on advertising and the sale of e-cigarettes. This is a clear sign that the Welsh Government is taking this issue seriously, and it is our responsibility here in Westminster to support and complement those efforts. And this bill illustrates that this government does take seriously its commitment to create that first smoke-free generation and to protect children from becoming hooked on vaping. And on vaping, let's be clear, it is not harmless. In 2023, Action on Smoking and Health estimated that 20.5% of children aged 11 to 17 had tried vaping. Whilst it is the case that vaping can be an effective way for adult smokers to quit smoking, vaping cannot be recommended for children as it carries serious risk of addiction and future harm. Accordingly, rather than being a deterrent to stop smoking, if left unregulated, vaping will see more children being exposed to nicotine, not less. That is why the measures set out in this bill to implement a total ban on vape advertising and sponsorship and, subject to consultation, the sale of vape flavours that are overtly appealing to children are so important, and I fully support them. This legislation is legislation our teachers, our head teachers, our medical professionals and our health services are all calling for. The vaping industry have been allowed to attract kids with their different flavours and bright packaging. Madam Deputy Speaker, we wouldn't allow this with any other addictive drug, and we shouldn't allow it with vaping. Additionally, on vaping, there is one aspect that this bill does not deal with, for which I would be grateful if the government could consider as this bill continues its passage through Parliament. Currently, police officers do not have specific powers to confiscate vapes from children, a power they do have with traditional cigarettes pursuant to Section 7.3 of the Children and Young Persons Act 1993. Having spoken to police officers and PCSOs in South Wales Police, this power of confiscation is an important tool that they use to deal with antisocial behaviour in designated areas of Cardiff, but the work is neutered if they cannot confiscate vapes as well. Now, whilst I recognise that if this bill is passed, in time such powers would not be necessary, and indeed this bill omits Section 7.3 of the Children and Young Persons Act 1993 from 27 onwards, I asked the government if they would consider whether it would be useful to retain this power and expand it to include vapes for the period between now and 2027, so that our police officers have the same legal powers across cigarettes and vapes as a tool in their armoury to combat antisocial behaviour. However, aside from that specific point, I conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, by reiterating my support for this important piece of legislation. Not only will it align this Parliament with the progressive actions of the Welsh Government on such important health matters, it will also bolster our commitment in this place to safeguarding public health. And in so doing, it will save so many thousands of lives from the scourge of cancer and protect children from becoming hooked on vaping.
Thank you, Alistair.
Speaker, I will vote for this bill. I would admit to some scepticism about enforceability in terms of the age escalator, but I think it does fundamentally address a huge problem in our society. There can be no doubt that smoking is a killer, and therefore the responsibility on us all is to seek to diminish the death toll. In respect of vaping, it's a very, in fact totally unregulated sector, and for many young people, I fear, it is a gateway to smoking, and therefore it is right that it too comes within the ambit of this bill. The Secretary of State this afternoon said that this was a Four Nations bill. I welcome that. I trust that is right. That's the point I want to test in my contribution, and to seek reassurance from the Minister about that. And the reason I test it is this, that Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland alone is still subject to the EU's tobacco directive. And we're subject to the EU's tobacco directive because it is one of 289 laws, EU laws, that are listed in Annex 2 of the Protocol, or the Windsor Framework, as it is now called, which remain in force in a part of this United Kingdom. And that tobacco directive, at Article 24, says this: Member States may not prohibit or restrict the placing on the market of tobacco or related products. Now, does this bill, by its necessary steps, restrict the placing on the market of tobacco? If it does, then this bill will fall foul of the tobacco directive and therefore will be unenforceable in Northern Ireland because of our ridiculous subjection to foreign laws that we don't make and can't change. Now, we have some illustration of what might happen, because in Denmark in 2022 they sought to introduce almost identical legislation. They had to withdraw it, and in withdrawing it, the health minister told the Danish Parliament on the 6th of April 2022, the ministry therefore considers that a ban on the sale of tobacco and nicotine products to people born in 2010 or later would require an amendment to the European Tobacco Products Directive. And on that basis, they withdrew it. Now, the Irish Republic, earlier this year, was minded to introduce legislation like this. They didn't proceed for the same reason. Now, if we're in a situation where a part of this United Kingdom, quite absurdly, cannot be governed by laws that this Parliament wishes to make, then we're in a very sad situation indeed. And it is my fear that, like in Denmark, the imprimatur will not be forthcoming from the tobacco directive, and therefore we could have a situation where laws that we want to make, that we want to apply throughout the United Kingdom, will not be able to be applied because of our subservience to foreign jurisdiction. And if that is so, then that will be quite an appalling situation. I might say to the House, you have an opportunity to do something about it when my private member's bill comes to this House on the 6th of December. And I trust members will take that opportunity to liberate Northern Ireland from the bind of foreign jurisdiction and foreign law. I would also be fearful that when this matter goes to court, as it in, because there are vested interests to try and challenge its applicability in Northern Ireland under the Tobacco Directive, I'd be fearful as to the line our courts might take, because we've had some examples. This House passed, for better or for worse, the Legacy Act. It passed the Rwanda Bill. I'm not commenting on the merits of them, but I'm making it clear that when both went to our High Court in Belfast, both were declared inoperable in Northern Ireland. Why? Because of the supremacy of EU law. And if that were to happen here, then wouldn't it be an absolute scandal that we cannot afford to the people of Northern Ireland the same health protections that this bill will afford to everyone else in the United Kingdom? And why not? Because we are subject to a foreign jurisdiction. And it's the lifting of that jurisdiction that brings us the liberty to be governed as this House would wish us to be governed. And I trust that the Minister will be able to assure us that those fears are unfounded, that the Danes were wrong to withdraw their act, and that our courts will... Yes.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. Look, I fully understand his concern here, I really do. That's why this government, and to give credit to the previous government, worked so hard to get this to a four-nation approach. I want to give him and the House the assurance it is the responsibility of the UK government to ensure compatibility of the bill with the Windsor Framework. The government has taken into account all domestic and international obligations in bringing this bill today.
I must say that gives me no assurance, because if the government's commitment is to ensure compliance with the Windsor Framework, it's the Windsor Framework which imposes the EU law on Northern Ireland. It's because it's in Annex 2, it's because of one of the listed laws in Annex 2 which continue to apply to Northern Ireland that it could trump what this bill says. And there's no point in saying to this House and to my constituents, we will abide by the Windsor Framework, because the Windsor Framework which binds us to EU law, and it's only by setting that aside that we can get the liberty from that.
I'm sorry to detain the House on this, but let me make it clear. This is a United Kingdom law. It covers all four nations of the United Kingdom, and we are assured that it is in compliance with the requirements of the Windsor Framework. This law will stand.
The House that a previous government, but government lawyers, probably the same, told this House that the Rwanda Bill would apply in Northern Ireland, the Legacy Bill was unchallengeable, and yet it turned out both of them fell under the supremacy of EU law. And on the face of it, the Tobacco Directive suppresses this bill, and the Tobacco Directive still has legal force in Northern Ireland. And if it turns out like that, then I would like to hear a commitment from the Minister that the government will override any suppression of this law in Northern Ireland and stand up for UK sovereignty in my part of the United Kingdom.
Jim Dixon.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a privilege to speak in this debate. The legislation brings forward a manifesto commitment and finishes the job started by the Right Honourable Member for Richmond at the back end of the last Parliament. Once it receives royal assent, this legislation will be the most advanced of its kind in the world, and we should be proud of that. I should also declare at the outset that I was a smoker, and this experience gives me a particular clarity on the need for change. I'm also honoured to be the Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Smoking and Health. I'd like to use my 6 minutes just to say a little bit on why this bill is so necessary, and also, and I hope the Minister doesn't mind, gently set out where I think it could perhaps go further. We often hear that smoking is about choice. The only choices I made at the age of 15 were to have my first cigarette and then almost 15 years later make a much more difficult choice to finally give up thousands of cigarettes after that. According to the wonderful ASH, Action on Smoking and Health, who have been quoted widely at this debate, the majority of smokers wish they had never started, and it takes on average 30 attempts to quit. This legislation will ensure that future generations of residents across the country and in Dartford do not have to have their freedom to choose stolen by a deadly addiction. The latest figures before their collection was interrupted by the pandemic were that nearly 6,000 people in Kent died from smoking between 2017 and 2019, with 10,000 hospital admissions due to smoking in Kent during 2019 and 2020 alone. Before being elected to this place, I was for many years a local councillor working on public health issues, and I was able to see firsthand the burden that smoking placed on my local community. Now I have the great honour to represent the wonderful constituency of Dartford. I can see smoking taking a similar toll. No matter where you are in the country, you will hear the same stories about loved ones lost too soon, about people becoming addicted as children, and about the most disadvantaged groups bearing the heaviest burden. We cannot and we must not accept a situation where over 75,000 deaths a year are attributable to smoking. We now know with more clarity than ever the damage that smoking causes. It can lead to at least 16 different types of cancer, and in 2023 smoking cost England £21.8 billion, mainly in lost economic productivity. So we have a chance to change this. Modelling by the Department of Health and Social Care estimates that raising the age of sale by 1 year every year will prevent almost 500,000 cases of stroke, heart disease, lung cancer and other lung diseases by the end of the century, saving tens of thousands of lives and helping untold numbers of people to lead healthier and more enjoyable lives. One thing that often comes up when discussing measures of this nature is, of course, how we make it enforceable. We should be clear that this legislation enjoys widespread public support, with 69% of the public in favour, according to polling undertaken by YouGov for ASH earlier this year, with even a slim majority of smokers in favour. This indicates that even many smokers recognise that we don't want to see the next generation grow up addicted to smoking. This is an issue that commands high public support, and where policies of this nature are done with and not to people, compliance is self-enforcing and high. I'd like to come on to where I think this bill and the government action around it can go a little bit further. I welcome the additional powers in the bill to create smoke-free outdoor spaces and to designate smoke-free places as vape-free as well. However, I will admit some slight disappointment that the government seems to have ruled out hospitality premises from the scope of these regulations, rather than setting out, via a consultation, some options as to how we might proceed. I hope the Minister will recognise that there are some other options other than an outright ban. As a number of smokers in the UK continues to decline, there is discussion to be had about how we use public spaces and protect individuals from second-hand smoke, particularly children and those with health conditions. I know from my time in local government that councils can play a vital role in improving the health of their communities. Councils across the country have used the pavement licensing system to create smoke-free outdoor spaces. This has proved popular with businesses and customers, particularly families with children. I gently urge the Minister to consider if this legislation might be amended to allow local authorities to decide what additional spaces, beyond those regulated nationally, they might like to make smoke-free in the best interests of communities. My final point, and I'm sure that it reflects those points made by other people in this debate, is around the polluter pays principle. We all know that public finances are under significant strain. If the funding we desperately need to create a smoke-free country cannot be found in our existing budgets,
I would urge ministers to consider the imposition of a polluter pays levy on tobacco manufacturers. I'm grateful to have been able to speak
Order,
debate.
order. Lee Dillon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was a smoker for 15 years, I've vaped for 12, and I have 3 children under 12 who I wish follow neither habit. I support the ambitions of creating a smoke-free society. The harm to individuals is clear, causing 80,000 deaths per year, and the cost of the country is just as clear, with nearly 22 billion a year costing the economy. However, I do have concerns about the ability of retailers to enforce the age escalator proposals, and wonder if the Minister would look at increasing the age at which anybody could buy tobacco by a year, every year, rather than linking it to when a child was born. That would mean that people of the same age would have the same rights, as opposed to 2 people being 37 and because of where they were born, not being able to purchase tobacco. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, my biggest concern with this bill is including vapes alongside tobacco. Vaping is the fastest growing smoking cessation method, and evidence has found that it is twice as effective as other stop smoking tools. I took part in the SI debate on the 13th of November in this House, and I support the ban on disposable vapes that regulation enacted. This will reduce the amount of children vaping. It will reduce the amount of dangerous fake vapes, and it will reduce the environmental impact. But this bill could go too far on vaping. The APPG for responsible vaping has provided a useful briefing, and I believe that this House will pass this bill later today. And so I do ask honourable members to have a look at that briefing before we get to committee stage, if indeed the vote does go that way. Part 5, Section 92 of this bill has the ability to undo the government's ambition of a smoke-free country by potentially banning flavours under a future statutory instrument. A study of more than 20,000 vapers showed that those who start with flavoured vapes or move from tobacco to flavoured vapes are more likely to quit smoking. That was my experience too, Madam Deputy Speaker. I first purchased a refillable vape in France. It came with a tobacco flavour and it came with a cherry flavour. I went back to the Gîte with my friends where we were on holiday, and I knew what tobacco tasted like. I had my own cigarettes in my pocket. So I tried the cherry flavour, and I enjoyed that cherry flavour so much I never opened the tobacco flavoured vape pot. I took the cigarettes that I had in my pocket back home to England. They were in my bedside table for 6 months, after which I screwed the packet up and threw it away, and have never had a cigarette since. I honestly feel that the provisions in the bill for ministers to be able to ban flavours for adults is going too far. For the record, I vape something called blueberry sour raspberry. It's not aimed at children because I buy it from a specialist vape shop where you have to be over 18. I've got the bottle in my pocket and it has no high colours or fancy graphics on it at all. But that is my preference as an adult to vape, and it stops me from wanting to pick up a cigarette again. So, if this bill does pass this evening, Madam Deputy Speaker, Section 92 should require that vape flavours are regulated with a balance of the impact on adults that would otherwise be smoking alongside the potential for youth uptake. And remember, members, that disposable vapes have already been banned by that previous statutory instrument that was passed a couple of weeks ago. So, finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, before ministers use the affirmative resolution procedure or any parts or sections of this bill, on any parts or sections of this bill, I would urge them to undertake a comprehensive evidence-based approach to vaping regulations. I will not vote against this bill at this stage, but once it gets to committee stage, I hope that the government are open to practical amendments that support the ambition to have a smoke-free generation without penalising those who already rely on vapes to lead a healthier lifestyle. Thank you.
We have 3 remaining backbench contributions. This is fair notice for colleagues who have contributed to the debate to make their way to the chamber for wind-ups. And I call Kirith Entwistle.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I must declare I'm a member of the APPG on responsible vaping, and I think that this is a long overdue and important piece of legislation. I commend my honourable and right honourable friends on the front benches for bringing it before the House. My home of Bolton is confronting a dual crisis: the devastating impact of smoking and the escalating problem of youth vaping. First, smoking continues to ruin lives and places a heavy burden on our NHS, which many of my honourable friends and colleagues across this House have also mentioned this evening. In Bolton North East, this crisis is deeply personal. More than 14% of our population still smokes, well above the national average. Tragically, between 2017 and 2019, smoking claimed the lives of 1,147 people in our community, including beloved parents, siblings and friends, leaving behind grieving families and stolen futures. Beyond its devastating human toll, smoking imposes an immense economic burden on Bolton North East. Nearly £100 million is drained every year in lost productivity and increased demands on health and social care. Money that we desperately need to rebuild services and support local families. I am proud that this bill takes critical steps to address the harms of smoking and works towards creating the first smoke-free generation. But while smoking is a crisis we know well, there is a new and growing threat: the epidemic of child vaping. In the latest Greater Manchester Testing and Research on Emergent New Drugs Young Person Survey, 76% of respondents reported using a nicotine vape in the past year. And school children are now twice as likely to encounter nicotine through vaping as through cigarettes or tobacco. Flavours like bubblegum and rainbow candy, paired with colourful cartoon-like packaging, are blatantly targeting children. And of course it is true that flavourings play an undoubtedly important role in helping adults quit smoking. However, we must be honest, too many vapes are being deliberately designed as a gateway to nicotine for children who have never smoked. And I welcome the measures included in the bill outlined by the Secretary of State earlier, and I'm pleased to see our government taking this issue seriously. And as a mother, I look forward to further discussions on how we can protect our children whilst continuing to support adults who are using vaping as a tool to quit smoking. Madam Deputy Speaker, what concerns me most is how easily young people are obtaining vapes, many of them illegal and unregulated. In Bolton, we now have the second highest number of vape stores per capita in the country. That is over twice the national average. While most stores operate within the law, this widespread availability creates opportunities for illegal vapes to enter the market. Vapes that violate safety standards, contain unsafe ingredients and pose serious health risks to our children. I will give way.
I thank you for giving way. Would you share my concern that there is a real problem with vapes being used in the coercion of children for grooming purposes as well?
For his intervention, and yes, I do share those concerns quite deeply. Bolton Council has been doing excellent work to clamp down on illegal vapes. In September, 350 vapes were seized in raids across 5 locations in Bolton. And just this month, a shop received a closure order for selling illegal tobacco and vapes. I am pleased that this bill responds to the needs of councils like Bolton's by introducing new powers for trading standards officers that will tackle the black market while protecting legitimate businesses. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill is a commitment to the health and well-being of our communities and our future generations. It takes into account the need for the safeguarding of our children, to families who have lost loved ones to smoking-related illnesses, to schools overwhelmed by the vaping epidemic, and to young people being targeted by unscrupulous marketing. This bill is for you, and I commend it to the House.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a rare thing in politics to have a moment where there is an absolute right thing to do. But consigning smoking to the history books for our children and our grandchildren and every generation that follows is one of those times. Because beyond no illusion, the decision that we take today will result at some point in the future, after we have long left this place, when nobody smokes. That's the legacy that this decision today will be. And I would ask the House to indulge me a moment. Imagine at that point in the future that somebody brings a bill forward to decriminalise smoking. And the Minister, clutching their impact assessment, tells the House that it will only kill 80,000 people a year, cost our NHS £3.6 billion, and that 80% of the people who take it up will be under 20. Which one of us would vote for it? Which party leader would refuse to give direction to their troops to vote for it? And who would argue that it's a freedom of choice to be able to take that decision to smoke in those circumstances? It is a nonsense. It's clear what the decision is we're taking today. It is for the good of this country. I will give way.
Thank you. The honourable member talks about choice, and I agree with so far what he said. Would he agree with me that when it comes to the banning of smoking for people born after the 1st of January 2009, in fact, there is no removal of choice in this bill because they cannot smoke anyway at the moment. So there is no removal of choice from those people.
I would absolutely agree with that. He's completely correct, and it's the proportionate way to do it. And indeed, some of the arguments that I've heard today about freedom of choice I've genuinely found confusing. One of the honourable members earlier argued that why don't we ban sugary foods? Why don't we ban alcohol on this basis? I sit there and go, you draw the line somewhere. We're not. That's an argument for decriminalisation of everything. Cocaine, heroin, you name it, let's go for it. No, you have to draw the line somewhere. And given the statistics around smoking, it is clear that this is the right line to draw. I really genuinely want to finish and not say a great deal more on this issue, other than to reflect on the conversations that I have with my children. We've been on a long journey when it comes to smoking in this country. I remember telling my children that, you know, you could get a seat in a restaurant and eat a meal, and the table next to you that was in the smoking zone would be smoking while you ate. They thought I was mad. I remember going to school and in front of you on the bus, the little cigarette holders, because you used to be able to smoke on the bus. My children think this is madness. I can only hope that not long from in the future, children will look back and think it was mad that we did it at all. And I was asked briefly after I was elected by a friend of mine, a parent. He asked me about this bill. He knew it had fallen prior to the general election. And he said to me, will it be back? And I said, oh, I'm very confident that it will be back. And he said, but will it be in time? And I said, in time for what? He said, in time for her, and pointed to his teenage daughter. So I'm very pleased to say to Mark and to Kim and to their daughter Bella, yes, we're bringing it back in time, and this will make a massive difference to the lives of people in this country. Thank you.
Final speaker, Phil Brickle.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to place on record my support for this bill, which the government is right to describe as the biggest public health intervention in a generation. As someone who grew up around the NHS with my first job in Bolton Hospital, I've seen firsthand the huge cost of smoking and vaping in my constituency. In Bolton, smoking claims around 380 lives a year. Across the UK, that number is 80,000, and tobacco-related illnesses put tremendous pressure on the NHS, with smoking responsible for 1 in 4 cancer deaths. Indeed, every single minute, someone is put in hospital because of smoking. The appointments, the scans, the treatment, it all adds up. Smoking costs the taxpayer over £3 billion every year in healthcare bills. Now, the tide of public opinion has turned irrevocably. 8 in 10 Greater Manchester adults now support ending smoking, according to the Make Smoke History campaign. Many, I suspect, have had family members or friends impacted themselves by smoking-related harms. Now, 5 years ago, the previous government announced its ambition for England to be smoke-free by 2030. And despite a stark warning from the Calm Review in 2022 that, and I quote, without further action, England will miss the smoke-free 2030 target by at least 7 years, I do find it regrettable that the party opposite did not get round to these literal life and death reforms before it was too late to legislate on this matter before the general election. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am delighted that just a few months in, we are already delivering on these manifesto pledges. a generational ban on purchasing tobacco for anyone born after the 1st of January 2009, new regulations for the extension of smoke-free areas to include our schools and hospitals, new restrictions on oral tobacco products like snus, all are hugely welcome in our fight against smoking-related illnesses. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill is hugely important, and I would like to focus the remainder of my remarks on vaping in particular. Now, as my honourable friend, the member for Bolton North East, has noted, Bolton is, regrettably, in the top 2 vaping capitals in the UK, with over 20 vape shops registered per 100,000 people, according to reporting in the Bolton News. Now, vaping can be a genuine aid for those seeking to wean themselves off smoking. But while it's clear that vapes, in combination with behavioural support, can support quitting, the health advice is unambiguous. Children and adults who have never smoked should never vape. So what disturbs me, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that these products are very obviously marketed at children. Indeed, a number of vape stores in the towns of Horwich and West Horton, in my constituency of Bolton West, are not only garish eyesores, they also directly associate vapes with sweets and toys in their shop fronts. I have no doubt that many of my colleagues in this chamber will be familiar with similar stores in their own constituencies, and it seems clear to me that bubblegum and candy floss flavours are not aimed at those adults genuinely trying to wean themselves off tobacco. This isn't harmless. Youth vaping has more than doubled in the last 5 years, while Bolton Council have been told that children as young as 13 are unable to go an hour at school without vaping. Indeed, just last Friday, Madam Deputy Speaker, I visited St Catherine's Primary School in Horwich and was shocked to hear children no older than 11 directly raise their concerns around the issue of vaping with me. And St Joseph's High School in Horwich, who I also had the pleasure of meeting last week here in Parliament, have had to install vape sensors, while the headmaster there, Tony McCabe, has said that he has seen a rise in young people already acquiring vapes from the black market. So I hope the Minister will also consider how to tackle the already expanding black market in these products. And that's why, Madam Deputy Speaker, I especially welcome measures in this bill to provide the Secretary of State with powers to regulate vaping products, including on contents and flavour, packaging and product requirements. I will give way.
You're right about illegal tobacco and other substances, and it's really important that we bear down on that illicit trade. Illegal tobacco not only deprives the exchequer of funds, leaving that to one side, it also means that all kinds of other nefarious activities could take place in the shops which sell illegal tobacco, and the cigarettes that are sold, Madam Deputy Speaker, don't extinguish. In my constituency a few years ago, there was a fire, a house fire, with fatalities as a direct result of illegal cigarettes.
To thank the Right Honourable Member for his contribution, I will take assurance from the Minister when he comes to wind up. I would also like to place on record my enthusiasm for the separate ban on single-use vapes from June 2025 that the Honourable Member for Newbury has already mentioned. As other members have already noted, not only are these particularly cheap and therefore accessible for young adults, but they are an inefficient use of critical resources, difficult to recycle, and are frequently littered around the countryside. To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, by introducing these world-leading reforms, we can create a smoke-free generation and break the cycle of addiction and disadvantage. And I'm proud to say that this is a Labour government which is delivering on this legislation.
And I come to the Shadow Minister, Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, prevention is better than cure. And as we've heard, smoking is a cause of many premature deaths and much serious ill health. This is why the previous government brought forward legislation to tackle this and to restrict access to tobacco purchases for those who were born after the 1st of January 2009. The bill today builds on many measures in this previous bill. As we've heard today, this is a bill of two parts: tobacco and vapes. And they've been received differently, a bit like Marmite and chocolate spread. Part controversial, part pretty universally liked. The section on smoking and tobacco has proved a bit like Marmite. Some people have liked it. For example, the member for Harrow East spoke eloquently of his passion to stop smoking measures, his successful campaigning, and the previous government's success in reducing rates of smoking. The honourable member for North, my honourable friend from North Dorset, spoke eloquently about the balance between libertarianism and choice, and the need for order, societal norms, and the protection of others in society. The honourable lady from the city of Durham spoke about the dangers of smoking and the difficulties and challenges posed by people trying to quit. But on the other hand, others expressed concern about this bill. The member for Lewes talked about how powers taken by the Secretary of State in relation to places outside where those may or may not smoke could be used. The honourable member for Newbury shared his concerns about how measures of the age of sale will work in practice. And it is indeed a clunky measure for shopkeepers to try and enforce, and will have an effect on a cohort of individuals just either side of the threshold who will require ID throughout their lives. The member for North Antrim also spoke about how this measure will work in Northern Ireland, and he had some reassurances from the Minister, but I'm not sure that they were completely effective. While I confess that I don't like Marmite, it is a free vote this evening on our benches, and I will support this bill. The Secretary of State said in his opening that 350 young people will start smoking today, most of whom will regret it. So why was the 1st of January 2009 chosen? I appreciate that was the date in the previous bill, but why was it chosen by him for his bill too? Moving on to the area of the chocolate spread, the broadly welcomed area, which I think has been universally welcomed and supported by the members for Newcastle East and Wallsend and North Shropshire, amongst others. They're the measures to tackle children vaping, measures that I've personally been campaigning on too. As others have said today, the Chief Medical Officer has been very clear. If you smoke, then vaping may be better for you. But if you don't smoke, don't vape. As a Member of Parliament and a children's doctor, I've been increasingly concerned about the sharp increase in children addicted to vaping, and more recently to other nicotine products, such as pouches. School teachers have reported children unable to concentrate, even to complete a whole lesson without using a bathroom to vape.
I'm immensely grateful to my friend, with whom I very rarely disagree. And she's right, of course, about vaping and the effect that has on children and the difficulties schools have in managing this, for example, as head teachers will have no doubt told members from across the House. But can she really go into the support bill with this nonsense about age? The idea that someone of 30 can smoke and someone of 29 can't. The idea that that can be policed or managed in any practical way. This is just nonsensical legislation. It was daft when the last government introduced it. It's daft when this one's doing so.
Thank my right honourable friend for his intervention. I think the challenge is, if one were to say to ban it altogether, one could risk criminalising people who already are addicted to this tobacco product, who are adults who've made that choice. And that's the reason I think that both governments, the present and the past government, brought forward the measure to increase things gradually. But I do understand the points that are made about the difficulties for shopkeepers and others in enforcing it over time. But back to vaping. Doctors report a growing body of evidence that suggests children may be having difficulty in schools and also that children may be suffering health problems as a result. The report from Health Watch said that 31% of the over 4,000 under-18s they surveyed were regularly vaping. Nicotine is a powerfully addictive product. Young people are particularly susceptible to this, and therefore it's very important that we protect children from vaping and other nicotine products. It is, after all, an adult activity. It's designed, apparently, to help smokers quit. And whilst the industry may argue flavours and colours are enjoyed by adults, and they may well be enjoyed by adults, I personally struggle to understand why adults would want a vape flavoured by unicorn milkshake, whatever a unicorn's milk tastes like. Health Watch survey showed that fruit flavours are very popular with children. The same has been repeated by various teaching unions, the British Medical Association, of which I'm a member, Cancer Research UK, and even a government report from last year. I also don't see why an adult stop smoking device needs to be disguised in the form of a highlighter pen that could perhaps be hidden in a children's pencil case, or created in the shape of a child's cartoon character. Enticing children, luring them into a lifetime of unwanted and potentially harmful addiction is, in my view, immoral. The Secretary of State has taken powers to regulate the flavours, the colours and the packaging. But how will he ensure he stays one step ahead of an industry whose income depends on a new generation of addicts? And how and when does he intend to use the powers that he's taken? He's taken quite extensive powers, which I know is of concern to some members and right honourable members, but how and when does he intend to use them? And what support will be given to children who are already addicted to vaping to help them quit? Finally, I'd like to register that while it is a free vote issue, I'm on a personal level pleased to see some of the proposals I put forward to the last bill incorporated within this one, particularly on sponsorship and advertising of vending machines. Madam Deputy Speaker, whatever our views on this bill, it is a bold legislation of good intention. It aims to improve the health of our nation and our children in particular, and reduce smoking and prevent nicotine addiction in the young. It's not clear whether it will work, but we have to all hope for the health of all of us and our children that it does.
Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to close on behalf of the Government. I want to start by commending the honourable members for City of Durham, Newcastle upon Tyne, East and Wallsend, Chatham and Aylesford, Suffolk Coastal, Worthing West, Southampton, Itchen, Mid-Cheshire, Cardiff West, Dartford, Bolton North East, Hartlepool, Bolton West, and on the opposition benches, North Dorset, Harrow East, Lewes, Aberdeenshire North and Moray East, Bath, South Antrim, North Antrim and Newbury for a series of outstanding contributions this afternoon. Many of us on these benches remember the last Labour government's proud history of public health measures. Indeed, some of us were here. From the indoor smoking ban to putting an end to cigarette advertising, we took the bold action to drive down smoking prevalence, and the country is still feeling the benefits of those policies today. But after 14 years of public health neglect, we have seen much of our hard work squandered. Health inequalities have grown worse. Life expectancy is stalling. And most appallingly of all, it's going into reverse in some communities. I will give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way and welcome this bill too. 6,000 children in Greater Manchester take up smoking each year. This allows tobacco and vape companies to profit from increasing health inequalities. By eradicating smoking, Greater Manchester economy would gain over 2.5 billion each year, funds which could be allocated to our health and social care sector. So does the Minister agree that by following the recommendations set out in the smoking review by Professor Javed Khan, OBE, who I think did an excellent job with the review, we have the unique opportunities to both save lives and reduce poverty, creating healthier and more equal society?
I want to thank my honourable friend for that contribution, not least because it allows me to place on record this government's thanks to Javed Khan for the work that he did in his review into smoking. And I want to say to my honourable friend, he hits the nail on the head, because the parts of Greater Manchester that both he and I represent, these health inequalities are stark, they're visible, and we are going to turn them around. That's why our health mission pledged to tackle the social inequalities that influence health and to ensure that children have the very best start possible, to give them the building blocks for a healthy life. This will be an immense challenge, but every member of this government is up for the battle. Now, colleagues have made a number of points, and I'll try and answer as many as I can in the time we have left. Firstly, I want to pay tribute to the honourable gentleman, the member for Harrow East, for the work that he's done on this for a number of years. And I want to assure him that all tobacco products are covered by this bill, including the chewing tobacco product that he referred to. My honourable friend, the member for City of Durham, who equally has been a passionate spokesperson for tackling smoking harm, is absolutely right to raise the issue of Article 5.3. The new Labour government takes very seriously its obligations as a party to the World Health Organisation's FCTC, and we remain fully committed to the Convention. This includes the important commitment under Article 5.3 to protect public health policies with respect to tobacco control from commercial and other vested interests of the tobacco industry. The Shadow Secretary of State referred to the powers to bring in smoke-free places, and we will consult on extending those smoke-free places to outside schools, children's playgrounds and hospitals in England. We believe this is the right balance to protecting the most vulnerable whilst recognising the current pressures facing the hospitality sector. I do want to make him aware, though, that this bill has been designed in full consultation with and to meet the needs of the devolved governments across the whole of the United Kingdom. It is a UK bill with powers that meet the requirements of each of the component parts of our country, and I reiterate that as far as England is concerned, this government will seek to consult on schools, children's playgrounds and hospitals only. On stop smoking services that a number of members, including the member for Harrow East, raised, we are putting an extra £70 million into local stop smoking services, which could help up to 200,000 successful quits a year. We are still rolling out a smoke-free pregnancy incentive scheme. We're supporting pregnant women to quit, and we're ensuring that more babies don't suffer a hit to their life chances before they've even been born.
Speaker, I thank the member for giving way. I'm very sorry I wasn't here for the beginning of the debate. I have very strong views on this matter because my father died of cancer. I quit 20 years ago, thank God. It occurs to me, we've heard from other people who have quit, that we could be mobilised, we who have quit, to help other people quit. And I would say to the government, why don't you just use us? We can do a lot of good and a lot of help.
I think the honourable gentleman's just talked himself into a job, and he's absolutely right that the best people to advocate for stopping smoking are former smokers themselves. And then we will still be encouraging adult smokers to switch to vaping through Swap to Stop in England, and I'm delighted that localities have asked for over 500,000 starter kits so far. And on advertising regulations, of course, the consultation will take place after royal assent, but I hope I can assure him that we will take away his points to ensure that the NHS is still able to advertise Swap to Stop under those regulations. In terms of a tobacco industry levy, fiscal matters are a matter for the Treasury, but I'm sure that his and others' views have been communicated to ministers there. The honourable member for Lewes mentioned the rise of the black market, and look, this is a line that has been parroted by the tobacco industry for years. And I think we need to spell out some facts here, because whenever the government, in whichever guise it has been, has introduced targeted tobacco control measures, the black market has actually not prospered. Consumption of illegal tobacco has gone from 15 billion cigarettes nearly 25 years ago to just a tenth of that amount last year. And when the last Labour government raised the age of sale from 16 to 18, the number of illicit cigarettes fell by a quarter. But what that does require then is better enforcement, and we will use every second of the generously long buffer period to support businesses in preparing for and implementing the changes, including through information campaigns. We are providing £10 million for trading standards to increase their capacity and capabilities next year, and there's £100 million for Border Force and HMRC over the next 5 years to tackle illicit and underage sales. The bill also allows trading standards to issue on-the-spot fines of £200 and be able to reinvest the proceeds of those fines and indeed of the licensing regime back into further enforcement.
I thank the Minister for giving way. On the issue of fines, will he consider a proposal to actually make sure these fines are at least raised by the rate of inflation each year rather than being fixed? And so possibly we can do it on a scale basis to make sure that these fines keep progress with necessary changes.
Well, look, we've already sought to double the fine that was proposed by the previous government's bill, which is a step. I listened very carefully to the argument he puts, and it may be something that he wishes to pursue at committee, should he be fortunate to be a member of that committee, and I look forward to the debates that we might have. In terms of a licensing regime, there were a number of questions posed by the Shadow Secretary of State, the Honourable Member for North Shropshire, my honourable friend, the Member for North Dorset, and others. And I want to reassure the House that across the sector there is a broad consensus for a licensing scheme amongst retailers, with more than 4/5 of retailers expressing their support. Now, unlike alcohol, there is currently no requirement for tobacco to have a licensing scheme, something that a lot of people outside of this House would actually find it really hard to understand, because they assume that convenience stores and supermarkets and other places that sell alcohol are similarly licensed to sell tobacco products, and that isn't the case. So we will be bringing in a licensing scheme because we know that that will have a huge public health impact in the same way that other licensing regimes do. I will give way.
Thank you very much. Thank you, the Honourable Member, for giving way. I, as a former portfolio in a council that managed licensing, wouldn't it be very convenient, simply as they're already managing significant other licensing functions, to simply add this function onto what they're already doing within councils? And that wouldn't necessarily be a significant bureaucratic hurdle, as has been commented on.
Look, the fact is local government is going to take the lead on this, and we will, Madam Deputy Speaker, be consulting widely on how we bring forward the licensing regime and how we implement it through secondary legislation following that consultation. An impact assessment will be prepared before the secondary legislation is introduced, but I want to work with local government across England, and I'm sure that ministerial counterparts in other parts of the United Kingdom that are seeking to bring in a licensing regime will do the same, to ensure we get this right for local government, including ensuring that the cost of running a licensing regime is met by the licensing regime itself. I'll give way.
Thank you very much. Given that local government is responsible for public health, I've had our Director of Public Health email me just today to say how supportive they are of this bill. Local government wants this opportunity to try and improve the health of local people. So actually, I think the fears that local government would have under some pressure is simply wrong, is it not?
My local friend's absolutely right, and in the engagement I've had with members across local government and across all parties in local government, both elected members and officers, directors of public health, they want these measures and they're up for introducing these measures and to help helping us get these measures right. The Honourable Lady, the member for North Shropshire, also raised, as did a number of others, the issue of ID checks. And on ID checks, I'd just gently say to those that have a degree of scepticism here is that most retailers already follow recommended practice and regularly ask customers for ID. We are stopping people from ever starting smoking, and 83% of smokers start before the age of 20. This means that someone who has never previously smoked is highly unlikely to want to take up smoking later in life. And our published modelling shows that smoking rates in England for 14 to 30-year-olds could be close to 0% as early as 2050 with the measures in this bill. I will give way.
Thank you. And as a former teacher, I do hope that one of the things this government is doing is working across departments. Will we be working with the Education Department on ensuring that we are having these conversations in our schools right from the beginning at primary level all the way through?
And that's absolutely crucial. As part of this, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have to make sure that we don't take our foot off the pedal when it comes to education and informing the next generation of children of the harms of smoking and of vaping as part of our public health initiative going forwards. In closing, Madam Deputy, I will give way very briefly.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. My constituents in Paisley and Renfrewshire South need a health service that moves from sickness to prevention. So can he confirm that this UK-wide bill will impact my constituents in Paisley and Renfrewshire South, and that he's had discussions with the Scottish Government about ensuring its implementation north of the border?
That's a really important point, and it allows me to place on the record my thanks to the health ministers in Scotland, Wales and in Northern Ireland for the way that they have approached our desire to bring all parts of the United Kingdom together and to make a smoke-free United Kingdom and not just a smoke-free England as part of this legislation. And I hope that I can reassure my honourable friend that I have had incredibly fruitful conversations with the Health Minister in Scotland, in the SNP Scottish Government, and that she is as wedded and committed to this bill and the measures in this bill as we are here in this House today, and that I am reassured that across the whole of the United Kingdom we will be walking in step to ensure that the next generation of children never ever take up smoking.
That's because we're better together.
I won't give way now. I do have to close my speech. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I know that you are keeping a very careful eye on the clock. If I had more time, I would have talked about the huge public health benefits of the bill that will do so much to prevent death, dementia and disability in old age. I could have gone into further detail about the economic benefits of the bill, getting people back into work and saving untold sums of money for our NHS. But from my perspective, the single most important thing this bill will do is to tackle those stark inequalities across our country, because this fight is personal to me. I have seen the harmful effects of tobacco on the people around me my entire life. As a schoolboy, I was educated about the harms of smoking, but it did nothing to stop a number of my peers becoming addicted to cigarettes. As an MP, I've seen firsthand how tobacco has devastated deprived communities across our country, not least in Greater Manchester. As a Minister for Public Health, I'm determined to end the cycle of poverty and ill health, the blight of addiction, disease and despair caused by smoking. No longer will it sap the strength of our cities, Stoke, Sunderland, Salford and so many others. This is the will of His Majesty's Government. That is the promise of this bill, and I urge colleagues from across the House, vote with us, protect your constituents and do the right thing.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many of that opinion say aye?
Aye!
Of the contrary, no?
No!
Division, clear the lobby. Question is the tobacco and vapes bill be read, have its second reading. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No.
Tellers for the ayes are Christian Wakeford and Kate Durden, and tellers for the noes are Sir Edward Lee and Sir Christopher Chu.
Thank you.
The ayes to the right, 415. The noes to the left, 47.
The ayes were 415, the noes were 47. So the ayes have it, unlock.
Yeah, there's democracy in it.
Programme motion to be moved formally.
Formally.
The question is, as on the order papers, may that opinion say aye?
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Money resolution to be moved formally.
Formally.
The question is, as on the order papers, may that opinion say aye?
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Ways and means resolution to be moved formally.
Formally.
The question is, as on the order papers, many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. That ends that.